The woman stood in the doorway with blood on her hands and a gun pointed at her chest. Behind her, a pregnant girl lay dying. In front of her, Pine Ridge's most powerful man smiled like a wolf who'd cornered his prey. "You should have stayed quiet, Mrs. Maddox," Victor Caldwell hissed. But Evelyn Hart had spent 7 years burying her grief in silence. She was done being quiet. This is a story about a midwife who couldn't have children, a mountain man hiding from the world, and the night they decided to burn down an empire of lies. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and stay until the end, because what happens next will break your heart before it heals it. The first scream came at midnight. Evelyn Hart jerked awake in her narrow bed, her healer's instincts firing before her mind fully surfaced from sleep. She knew that sound, the raw animal terror of a woman whose body was tearing itself apart to bring life into the world. In 7 years of midwifery, she'd heard it hundreds of times. It never got easier. She was dressed and out the door in 90 seconds, her medical bag already packed, her dark hair twisted into a ruthless knot at the base of her skull. The November cold hit her like a fist, but Evelyn barely noticed. Pain had a way of sharpening focus. Pine Ridge Valley lay quiet under a thin crescent moon, the kind of silence that felt like held breath. Most of the town's 200 souls were asleep in their timber houses, trusting that morning would come gentle. They didn't know what Evelyn knew, that life could end between one heartbeat and the next, that safety was an illusion people told themselves so they could close their eyes at night. The scream came again, closer now. Evelyn's boots hit the frozen dirt of Main Street at a run. She found Sarah Winters on the floor of the general store, her water broken, her face the color of old snow. Her husband Jim knelt beside her, his hands shaking so badly he couldn't tie the tourniquet Evelyn shoved at him. "How long?" Evelyn's voice cut through the chaos like a clean blade. "An hour, maybe more. I thought it was false labor." "It's not." Evelyn's hands were already moving, checking dilation, checking position, checking the dozen things that could kill both mother and child in the next 30 minutes. Her mind cataloged the details with the cold efficiency of someone who'd learned not to feel too much. First baby, 3 weeks early, breech presentation, significant bleeding. Bad. This was bad. "Jim, I need you to get Dr. Morrison, right now." The man stumbled to his feet and ran. Evelyn didn't watch him go. She was already stripping away Sarah's skirts, laying out her instruments, calculating odds that made her stomach clench. "Am I going to die?" Sarah's voice was small, a child's voice trapped in a woman's body. Evelyn looked into those terrified eyes and lied with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned that hope was sometimes the only medicine that mattered. "No. You're going to meet your daughter in about 20 minutes, and you're both going to be fine." She didn't mention that breech births killed 1 in 10 mothers. Didn't mention that the bleeding suggested placental abruption. Didn't mention that Dr. Morrison was 73 years old and half blind, or that he was probably 3 whiskeys deep by now. She just worked. Her hands moved with the terrible grace of long practice, feeling, adjusting, coaxing the baby into a position that might, if they were lucky, allow both of them to survive this. She'd done this before. She'd saved dozens of women and their children from deaths that frontier medicine said were inevitable. But she'd also failed. 7 years ago, she'd failed in a way that had carved her life into before and after. "Push," she commanded, and Sarah pushed, and the baby didn't come. Again. Nothing. Evelyn's mind raced through options, each one worse than the last. She could feel the baby's heartbeat weakening, could see Sarah's strength failing. In a city hospital, they'd have surgical options. Here, in Pine Ridge Valley, they had Evelyn's hands and whatever grace the universe might spare. "One more time, Sarah. Give me everything." The woman screamed, a sound that seemed to tear the night itself, and the baby moved. Not enough. Not nearly enough. Evelyn made a decision. Her hands, slick with blood, found the baby's shoulder and did something that would have made a trained surgeon wince. She pulled, twisted, guided with a force that walked the razor's edge between salvation and catastrophe. The baby came free in a rush of fluid and tissue, silent and blue. For 3 seconds that lasted a lifetime, Evelyn worked. clearing airways, stimulating breathing, doing the things that separated the living from the dead. Then, a gasp, a cough, a thin, wavering cry that built into something stronger. Sarah Winters wept. Evelyn cut the cord with hands that didn't shake, delivered the placenta, checked for tears that needed stitching. She found them. She stitched them. She did all the mechanical things that needed doing while her heart hammered against her ribs like a prisoner trying to escape. Another one saved. Another one who got to go home. By the time Dr. Morrison arrived, smelling of whiskey and winter air, it was over. He looked at the living mother and the crying baby and nodded with the satisfaction of a man who'd taught Evelyn everything she knew. Good work, Evie. She didn't correct him, didn't mention that she'd done it alone, same as always. She just cleaned her instruments, packed her bag, and accepted the $3 Jim Winters pressed into her hand with eyes that said he understood she'd just given him back his whole world. The walk home took 15 minutes. Evelyn spent them trying not to think about the weight of an infant in her arms, the particular warmth of new life, the way Sarah Winters would carry her daughter home and nurse her and watch her grow, all the things Evelyn would never have. Her cabin sat at the edge of town, small and neat and absolutely silent. She'd lived there alone since Thomas died. 5 rooms that echoed. A kitchen table set for one. A bedroom with space on both sides of the bed that would never be filled. She washed the blood from her hands in water she'd heated on the stove, hung her coat on the hook by the door, sat in the rocking chair that had been her mother's and stared at nothing. This was her life, saving other women's children, coming home to emptiness, being respected, pitied, needed, and utterly alone. She was 31 years old, and sometimes she felt ancient. The knock came at 2 a.m. Evelyn's first thought was that something had gone wrong with Sarah Winters. Her second thought was that 2 knocks in one night meant someone was dying. She opened the door expecting emergency. Instead, she found a man. Not just any man, Cole Maddox. She knew him by reputation only. The mountain rancher who lived up on Ironcrest Ridge and came down to Pine Ridge maybe twice a year for supplies. 6 feet and change of hard muscle and harder silences. Dark hair, darker eyes, a face that looked like it had been carved from the same granite as the mountains he called home. He stood on her porch like a storm waiting to break. Mrs. Hart. His voice was low, rough with disuse. Mr. Maddox. She kept her hand on the door, her body language making it clear that strange men didn't get invited into widows' homes at 2 a.m, reputation or no reputation. If you're hurt, I'm not hurt. He paused, and something in his expression shifted. Not softening, Cole Maddox didn't look like a man who softened, but perhaps hesitating. I need to speak with you. It's important. It's 2 a.m. I know. They stared at each other. Evelyn found herself cataloging details the way she did with Patience, the lines around his eyes that said he spent his life squinting into sun and wind, the careful stillness of someone who'd learned to move quiet around spooked animals, the broad hands that looked like they could break bones or gentle horses with equal ease. 5 minutes, she said, and stepped back. He entered her home like a wolf entering a shepherd's cottage, all coiled wariness, eyes tracking exits, body language screaming that domesticity was foreign territory. He didn't sit when she gestured to a chair, just stood in the center of her small parlor, his hat in his hands, and got to it. I need a wife. Of all the things Evelyn had expected, that wasn't on the list. She felt her eyebrows climb. I beg your pardon? A wife, a partner, someone to share the ranch, the work, the winters. He spoke like he was negotiating a business contract, which she supposed he was. I've got 2,000 acres on Ironcrest, a herd of cattle, a house that's solid, no debt, no family, no complications. Mr. Maddox, I'm not asking you to love me. The words came out flat, honest. I'm asking you to consider a practical arrangement. You're a widow. You work yourself half to death for this town, and they pay you in pittances and pity. I'm offering you security, a home, respect. Evelyn felt something cold settle in her stomach. What makes you think I'd want to leave Pine Ridge? Because I see the way you look at those babies you deliver. His dark eyes held hers, unflinching. Like you're saying goodbye to something you'll never have. Because I watched you walk home tonight from the Winters place, and you look like the loneliest person I've ever seen." The words hit like a physical blow. Evelyn's hands curled into fists at her sides, nails biting into her palms. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough." He took a step forward, and for the first time something almost gentle entered his voice. "I know you lost a husband and a child 7 years ago. I know the whole town whispers about it like it's a tragedy instead of just life being cruel. I know you're stronger than any woman I've ever met, and I know that strength is being wasted on people who take and never give back. And you're different?" "No." The honesty was brutal. "I'm a man who lives alone on a mountain because people are complicated, and I'm not good with complicated, but I need help. The ranch is too much for one person. Winters are getting harder. I'm getting older, and I'm tired of—" He stopped, jaw working like the words were fighting him. "I'm tired of silence." Evelyn stared at this stranger who'd somehow reached into her chest and named the thing she'd been running from for 7 years. The terrible, endless silence of a life half-lived. "What exactly are you proposing?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "A partnership. You'd keep the house, tend the animals, help with the ranch work. I'd provide for you, protect you, respect you. We'd face the winters together instead of alone." He paused. "And if you want to continue your midwife work, I'd support that. The mountain communities need healers. There's a woman up in Greystone who's been begging for someone with medical training." "You've thought this through." "I've thought about nothing else for 3 months." "Why me?" The question hung between them. Cole Maddox looked at her with those dark, careful eyes and said, "Because you understand loss. Because you don't need me to be something I'm not. Because when I asked around about the strongest person in Pine Ridge Valley, every single person said your name." Something in Evelyn's chest cracked. Not broke. She'd broken 7 years ago and put herself back together with scar tissue and silence. This was different. This was the sound of a door she'd thought was sealed forever suddenly showing a crack of light underneath. "I can't give you children." The words came out harder than she meant them. "The birth that killed my son damaged something inside me. Dr. Morrison says it's unlikely I'll ever carry to term again. I'm not asking for children. I'm asking for a partner. I don't love you. I don't even know you. I don't love you either." He said it without cruelty, just fact. "But I respect what you've survived. That's more than most marriages start with." Evelyn looked around her small, silent cabin, at the life she'd built from the wreckage of the one she'd lost. It was a good life in its way, useful, necessary, lonely as a grave. She thought about Sarah Winters going home to her husband and her baby, thought about the dozen other women she'd helped bring their children into the world, thought about the years stretching ahead, an endless procession of other people's joy and her own careful, managed grief. "I need time to think. I'll come back in 3 days." Cole Maddox put his hat back on, adjusted it with the precise movements of a man who did everything with careful intention. Then he met her eyes one more time. "I'm not offering you a fairy tale, Mrs. Hart. I'm offering you a chance to stop being alone. Think about whether that's worth taking a risk on a man you don't know." He left as quietly as he'd come, a shadow dissolving into the pre-dawn dark. Evelyn stood in her doorway and watched him mount a horse she hadn't even heard him arrive on, a big bay gelding that moved like smoke, and ride back up the mountain road. The town began to wake around her. First light touched the peaks. Somewhere, a rooster crowed. Life continued as it always did, indifferent to the small human dramas playing out in its margins. Evelyn Hart closed her door, leaned against it, and tried to remember the last time someone had offered her anything other than pity or payment. She couldn't. For 3 days, Evelyn worked. She delivered 2 babies, both healthy, both safe. She treated a farmer's infected hand, set a child's broken finger, made poultices for old Mrs. Chen's arthritis. She did all the things that made her necessary to Pine Ridge Valley. And the whole time, Cole Maddox's words echoed in her head. "I'm tired of silence." She understood that. She understood it in her bones. On the second day, she visited her husband's grave on the hill overlooking town. "Thomas Hart, beloved husband and father," the stone read. She'd chosen those words 7 years ago when grief was still fresh enough to bleed. "I don't know what to do," she told the cold granite. He's offering me a life, not love, but life. Is that enough? Is it wrong to want that? The dead, as always, offered no answers. On the third day, she pulled out the lockbox she kept under her bed and counted her savings. $247, earned a few dollars at a time over 7 years of births and deaths and everything in between. It wasn't enough to start over somewhere new. Wasn't enough to buy independence. It was just enough to stay exactly where she was, doing exactly what she'd always done, until she was old and used up and buried next to the husband who'd left her too soon. The thought made her want to scream. When Cole Maddox knocked on her door at sunset on the third day, Evelyn had already packed a bag. He looked at it sitting by the door, looked at her, and something that might have been relief flickered across his granite features. "You'll come?" "I have conditions." "Name them." "I keep my medical practice. If someone needs me, I go no matter the weather or the hour." "Agreed." "I want my own space, a room where I can close the door and be alone when I need to." "The house has 4 bedrooms. Pick whichever one you want." "And I want honesty. If this isn't working, if you regret it, I need you to tell me, not let it fester." Cole Maddox stepped into her cabin and offered his hand. When she took it, his palm was calloused, warm, steady. "I promise you honesty, Mrs. Hart. It's about all I'm good at." "Evelyn, if we're doing this, you should call me Evelyn." "Cole." A pause. "We should make this legal. I had papers drawn up." He produced a folded document from his coat pocket. Evelyn read it by lamplight. A marriage contract, plain and practical as the man who'd written it. It outlined property rights, inheritance, grounds for dissolution. It was the least romantic thing she'd ever seen. She signed it anyway. "There's a judge in Greystone who owes me a favor," Cole said. "We can make it official tomorrow, unless you want something more." "No," Evelyn cut him off. "This is fine. Better than fine. It's honest." They rode out at dawn, Evelyn on a gentle mare Cole had brought for her medical supplies and her few possessions packed on a mule trailing behind. She didn't look back at Pine Ridge Valley, didn't let herself feel the weight of leaving the only home she'd known since Thomas died. She just followed Cole Maddox up the mountain into whatever future they were going to build together. The ride took 4 hours. The path climbed through pine forests that smelled like resin and snow, across high meadows where the wind cut like a knife, around granite outcrops that had stood since the earth was young. Cole rode ahead, silent, occasionally pointing out landmarks, the creek where he drew water, the ridge where mountain lions denned, the northern pasture where the cattle wintered. Evelyn cataloged it all with the same attention she brought to a medical examination. This was her life now. She needed to know its geography. The house appeared without warning, tucked into a fold of the mountain where the peaks created a natural windbreak. It was bigger than she'd expected, 2 stories of solid timber construction with a wide porch and real glass windows. Smoke curled from the chimney. The whole place had the look of something built to last. Cole dismounted and helped her down, his hands careful on her waist. "Welcome home." The words should have felt presumptuous. Instead, they felt like a promise. Inside, the house was sparse but clean, a main room dominated by a stone fireplace large enough to roast a whole pig, a kitchen with a wood stove and hand-built cabinets, stairs leading up to the bedrooms. And everywhere, Evelyn saw preparations. A corner of the kitchen had been cleared and outfitted with shelves clearly meant for medical supplies. The largest bedroom upstairs had a desk, a chair, and a south-facing window that flooded the space with light. In the barn, Cole had set aside a section with hooks for drying herbs and a workbench for mixing medicines. He'd built her a life before she'd even agreed to live it. "You were very sure I'd say yes," she said softly. Cole shrugged, uncomfortable with the observation. "I was hopeful. And if you'd said no, well, the shelves wouldn't go to waste." "Cole?" She waited until he looked at her. "Thank you." He nodded, gruff. "I'll show you the rest of the property tomorrow. For now, you should rest." The ride was long. But Evelyn wasn't tired. She was awake in a way she hadn't been in 7 years, every nerve singing with the strangeness of this new reality. She unpacked her medical supplies, arranged them on the shelves Cole had built, explored the house room by room, claiming the bedroom he'd prepared with its desk and its light. That night, they ate a simple dinner of bread and stew at the kitchen table. Cole wasn't much of a conversationalist, but the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the quiet of two people who'd both spent too long alone, learning to be in the same space. "There's something you should know," Cole said as they were washing dishes, "about why I left Pine Ridge." Evelyn's hands stilled in the wash water. "You don't owe me your history." "I do if we're going to be honest with each other." He set down the plate he'd been drying, his jaw tight. "My father died in Victor Caldwell's mine 15 years ago. Cave-in. Caldwell knew that shaft was unstable. There were reports, complaints, warnings. He ignored them all because fixing it would have cost money." The name Caldwell sent a chill through Evelyn's chest. Everyone in Pine Ridge knew Victor Caldwell, the man who owned the silver mine, the man who owned half the town, the man whose word was law. 23 men died that day, Cole continued, his voice flat with old rage. "My father was one of them. I was 16. I asked questions, made noise, demanded an investigation." He laughed, bitter. "Caldwell had me run out of town, said if I ever came back, he'd make sure I joined my father in the ground. So you came up here?" "So I came up here. Built this place. Made a life away from men like Victor Caldwell." He turned to face her, and his eyes were hard. "But I want you to understand, I'm not a good man, Evelyn. I'm angry. I hold grudges. And if Caldwell ever gets what's coming to him, I won't shed a tear." Evelyn thought about Sarah Winters, about all the women in Pine Ridge who worked themselves ragged while men like Caldwell got rich off their husbands' labor. She thought about the babies she'd delivered in company housing, born into debt their parents could never escape. "I don't need you to be a good man," she said quietly. "I need you to be an honest one." Something in Cole's expression softened, just a fraction. "Then we'll do fine." That night, Evelyn lay in her new bed in her new house on the side of a mountain, listening to the wind in the pines and the distant call of an owl. She thought about the life she'd left behind, the life she was building. For the first time in 7 years, her arms didn't feel quite so empty. Downstairs, she heard Cole banking the fire for the night, his footsteps moving through the house with the confidence of someone who knew every board, every corner. Heard his door close quietly, respecting the space between them. She pulled the quilt up to her chin, a wedding ring pattern, she noticed, handmade by someone with skill and patience, and closed her eyes. Morning would bring new challenges. But tonight, for the first time since Thomas died, Evelyn Hart went to sleep in a house that didn't echo. It was enough. Winter arrived on Ironcrest Mountain like an invading army, swift, merciless, and absolute. Within a week of Evelyn's arrival, the first major storm buried the ranch under 3 feet of snow and cut them off from the valley below. The world contracted to the house, the barn, and the narrow paths Cole dug between them each morning before dawn. Evelyn discovered that marriage to a mountain rancher meant work, endless, back-breaking work. She learned to milk the 2 dairy cows Cole kept in the barn, her city-soft hands cramping until they bled and then callousing over. Learned to split kindling with an axe that felt impossibly heavy until suddenly it didn't. Learned to read the sky for incoming weather, to know by the quality of silence when the temperature had dropped below 0, to navigate by starlight when the snow reflected enough moon to turn night into something almost navigable. Cole taught her with the patience of a man who understood that knowledge was survival. He didn't hover or condescend, just showed her once, corrected her when necessary, and trusted her to figure out the rest. "You're a quick study," he said one morning, watching her heft a hay bale that would have defeated her 2 weeks earlier. "I'm motivated not to freeze to death." The corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. "That'll do it." They developed routines. Cole woke before sunrise to tend the cattle. Evelyn managed the chickens, collected eggs, started breakfast. They ate together in a silence that grew increasingly comfortable, then spent their days in separate orbits. Cole working the ranch, Evelyn organizing her medical supplies and studying the anatomy texts she'd brought from Pine Ridge. Evenings found them in the main room, Cole mending tack or carving by firelight, while Evelyn read or updated her medical journals. Sometimes hours would pass without a word spoken. It should have felt lonely. Instead, it felt like peace. But peace Evelyn was learning, was a fragile thing in a territory ruled by men like Victor Caldwell. The trouble started 3 weeks into December. A rider came up the mountain road during a break in the weather, a young man named Jack Porter, who worked one of the smaller claims on the southern slope. His face was tight with worry beneath his frost-rimmed beard. "Mrs. Maddox." He nodded to Evelyn, then turned to Cole. "We got problems. Big ones." Cole set down the harness he'd been repairing. "Come inside. Warm up first." Over coffee thick enough to strip paint, Jack laid out the situation. Victor Caldwell had decided to expand his mining operations. Not content with the silver veins running beneath Pine Ridge, he'd sent surveyors into the mountain territories, claiming mineral rights on land that had been worked by independent prospectors for 20 years. "He's saying we're trespassing," Jack said, his hands wrapped around the coffee mug like he was trying to draw heat from the earth itself. "Says we got 2 weeks to clear out, or he'll have the territorial marshal remove us." Evelyn felt Cole go still beside her. That dangerous quiet she was learning meant his mind was working through angles, calculating odds. "He have legal standing?" Cole asked. "His lawyers say he does. Got some old Spanish land grant that supposedly covers everything from Pine Ridge to the North Pass." Jack's jaw tightened. "Most of us can't afford lawyers to fight it. And the families—" He stopped, looked at Evelyn. "We got women and kids up here, ma'am. Winter's barely started. If Caldwell forces us out now, people will die." "How many families?" Evelyn heard herself ask. 12, maybe 40 people total, half of them children under 10. The number sat in the room like a physical weight. Evelyn thought about 40 people displaced into a mountain winter with nowhere to go. Thought about the children, the pregnant women, the elderly who wouldn't survive a forced march down to Pine Ridge. "There's more," Jack said quietly. "Emma Reeves is 8 months pregnant. Her husband Tom works the northern claim. They got 3 little ones already. If Caldwell's men come through, they won't." Cole's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Not if we stand together." Jack's eyes widened. "You'd help us? After what Caldwell did to your family? Especially because of what Caldwell did to my family." Cole stood, began pacing the room with restless energy. He's been pushing boundaries for 15 years, taking what isn't his, crushing anyone who pushes back. Someone has to say enough. "Cole?" Evelyn kept her voice level. "If you go against Caldwell openly, he won't just run you off the mountain. He'll destroy you." "Then he'll destroy me." He turned to face her, and his eyes were dark with old fury. "But I'm not standing by while he does to these families what he did to mine." Evelyn looked at this man she'd married 3 weeks ago, this stranger who'd offered her partnership and honesty. She thought about the shelves he'd built for her medical supplies before she'd even said yes. Thought about the way he'd taught her to survive a mountain winter without once making her feel small for not knowing. She thought about the kind of man who'd spent 15 years hiding from the world rather than risk becoming like the monsters he'd fled. "If Emma Reeves is 8 months pregnant, she needs a midwife," Evelyn heard herself say. "And if there are 40 people up here, they probably need medical care. When do we leave?" Cole stared at her. "You don't have to—" "We're partners, aren't we? You said we'd face winters together." She stood, already mentally cataloging which supplies she'd need to pack. "That means we face this together too." Something shifted in Cole's expression, not quite gratitude, not quite relief, but something deeper. Recognition, maybe. The understanding that he'd chosen better than he knew when he'd ridden down to Pine Ridge and asked her to take a chance on him. "Tomorrow at first light," he said. "Jack, get word to the other families. Tell them we're calling a meeting at the Reeves claim. Tell them to bring everyone." Jack left an hour later, his horse's hoofprints filling with fresh snow almost as soon as he'd made them. Evelyn spent the evening packing medical supplies while Cole checked ammunition for the rifle he kept over the mantel. "You think it'll come to shooting?" she asked. "I think Caldwell's men don't respond to polite conversation." He ran an oiled cloth over the rifle's barrel, his movements precise. "But I'm hoping the sight of a dozen armed prospectors will make them reconsider." "And if it doesn't?" Cole set down the rifle and looked at her. "Then we make sure the families are somewhere safe before the fight comes. Women and children first. Always." They rode out the next morning into cold so intense it felt like breathing glass. The path to the northern claims wound through forests where the snow lay 6 feet deep in places, where one wrong step could send horse and rider tumbling into ravines that wouldn't give up their dead until spring thaw. Cole navigated it like he'd been born to these mountains, which perhaps he had. Evelyn followed, her mare picking careful steps, her medical bag strapped tight across her back. They found the Reeves family in a cabin that was half dugout, half timber, barely large enough for the 5 of them. Tom Reeves was a lean man with desperate eyes. His wife Emma looked like a strong wind would knock her over, except for the belly that said new life was coming, whether the world was ready or not. Mrs. Maddox. Emma's smile was tired but genuine. Jack said you'd come. I wasn't sure I believed him. May I examine you? The examination took place in the cabin's single bedroom, a space so small Evelyn had to conduct it sitting on the floor. Emma was thin, too thin for a woman this far along. Evelyn could feel the baby's position, could count its heartbeat, could see the way Emma's hands shook with a weakness that came from not enough food. When did you last have meat? Evelyn asked gently. Tom shot a rabbit last week. We made it last 4 days. 4 days, 5 people, 1 rabbit. Evelyn's jaw tightened. And before that? Maybe 10 days? Emma's voice was small. The hunting's been poor since the surveyors came through, scared off the game. Outside, voices were gathering as the other families arrived for the meeting. Evelyn helped Emma to her feet, noting the swelling in her ankles, the shadows under her eyes, all the small signs that said this woman was running on fumes and will. You're doing fine, Evelyn lied. Baby's strong, but you need rest and better food. I'll rest when we know if we still have a home come spring. The meeting convened in the clearing outside the Reeves cabin, a dozen families huddled together against the cold. They were a rough crowd, prospectors and trappers, men who'd come to the mountains to escape the rules and regulations of civilized society. Their wives looked harder, carved lean by the kind of life that killed soft women. Cole stood on a stump so everyone could see him. Evelyn had never seen him address a crowd before. He did it like he did everything else, direct, honest, no wasted words. Most of you know me. I've been up here 15 years keeping to myself, not causing trouble, but Victor Caldwell has decided that's not good enough. He wants our land, our claims, our lives, and he's using the law to take what he couldn't earn. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Cole raised a hand for silence. I'm here to tell you we have options. We can fight this legally, find lawyers, contest the land grant, tie Caldwell up in courts for years. It'll cost money most of us don't have, and there's no guarantee we'll win. Or, Tom Reeves called out, or we stand our ground. Make it clear that we're not leaving, legal threats or no legal threats. Make Caldwell's men understand that taking this mountain will cost them more than it's worth. An older prospector named Dutch spoke up, his voice gravelly. You're talking about going to war with the richest man in the territory. I'm talking about not rolling over when a bully comes calling. Cole's eyes swept the crowd. 15 years ago, Caldwell killed 23 men, including my father, because safety protocols cost too much. He got away with it because nobody stood up. Nobody said enough. I'm not making that mistake again. Silence fell over the clearing, broken only by the whisper of wind through the pines. Evelyn watched these families calculate odds, weigh survival against principle, try to decide if dying free was better than living under Caldwell's boot. It was Emma Reeves who spoke next, her voice thin but clear. We got nowhere else to go. The claim's been in Tom's family 20 years. We sell it, we got maybe enough to make it to California if we're lucky. Start over with nothing. She placed a hand on her belly. I'm not birthing my baby in a wagon on the trail because some rich man decided he wants more silver. We stay, Tom said firmly. We fight. One by one, the other families agreed. Not because it was smart, not because they thought they'd win, but because sometimes principle was all people had left. Cole looked out at these faces, weathered, scared, defiant, and nodded. Then here's what we do. We organize. Set up watches so Caldwell can't catch us sleeping. Pool resources so everyone has food, ammunition, medicine. And we get proof. Proof of what? Dutch asked. Proof that Caldwell's land grant is fraudulent. Proof that he's done this before, taken land that wasn't his. Proof that'll stand up in territorial court if it comes to that. Cole's expression hardened. My wife and I will go to Pine Ridge, talk to people, dig through records, find what we need to bury Victor Caldwell once and for all. Every eye turned to Evelyn. She felt the weight of their hope, their desperation, felt the responsibility settling onto her shoulders like a yoke. She thought about Emma Reeves, about the baby that would be born into uncertainty, thought about all the children in Pine Ridge Valley who deserved better than Victor Caldwell's version of justice. We'll need access to the mining company's records, she said, her mind already working through the problem. Employment histories, safety reports, anything that shows a pattern of negligence. Caldwell keeps those locked up tighter than a bank vault, someone muttered. Then we'll need someone on the inside. Evelyn looked at Cole. Someone who works for the company who's willing to help us. Cole's jaw tightened. That's dangerous. If Caldwell finds out, then we'll have to make sure he doesn't find out until it's too late. She turned back to the assembled families. I've been delivering babies in Pine Ridge for 7 years. I know these people. Someone will help. Someone always does if you ask the right way. The meeting broke up an hour later with assignments distributed and a plan sketched out in broad strokes. Evelyn spent the rest of the day examining the families, treating frostbite and malnutrition, and the dozen small ailments that became deadly in mountain winters. She left them most of her medical supplies, keeping only what she and Cole would need for the journey back. That night, they stayed at the Reeves cabin, Evelyn and Emma sleeping in the bedroom while the men kept watch outside in shifts. In the darkness, Emma's whisper found her. You don't have to do this, you know. Risk yourself for people you barely know. Evelyn thought about that, about the life she'd left in Pine Ridge, the safety she'd traded for this uncertain partnership with a mountain man who held grudges and fought lost causes. Yes, she said quietly. I do. Because someone has to. They left for Pine Ridge at dawn, riding hard to make the trip in a single day. The temperature had dropped overnight, turning the world into crystal and silence. Evelyn's breath froze in her lungs. Her fingers went numb inside her gloves. But she pushed through, following Cole's steady lead down the mountain. They reached Pine Ridge as sunset was painting the valley in shades of blood and gold. The town looked smaller than Evelyn remembered, more fragile. She'd only been gone a month, but already it felt like visiting a previous life. Cole pulled up at the edge of town, his expression tight. I haven't been back here in 15 years. Caldwell finds out I'm in Pine Ridge. Then we move fast and we're careful. Evelyn reached over and squeezed his hand. Who did you trust here? Before everything happened? He was quiet for a long moment, thinking. There was a clerk at the mining office, young guy named Michael Chen. His mother does the washing for the company houses. He was 16 when my father died. Looked at me like he wanted to say something but was too scared. Mrs. Chen, Evelyn knew her, had treated her arthritis, delivered her daughter's baby 2 years ago. I can talk to her, see if Michael's still around, if he'd be willing to help. They split up as darkness fell. Cole took the horses to a stable on the outskirts, keeping to the shadows. Evelyn walked through town with her medical bag, just another house call, nothing to draw attention. She found Mrs. Chen in the company boarding house, her hands red and raw from lye soap and hot water. The old woman's face lit up when she saw Evelyn. Mrs. Hart, we heard you'd married and left town. The mountain rancher, yes? Yes. Evelyn kept her voice low. Mrs. Chen, I need your help. It's important. Over tea in the old woman's tiny room, Evelyn laid out what they needed. Mrs. Chen listened without interrupting, her weathered face unreadable. My son, she said when Evelyn finished. He works in the records office now. He sees things, hears things. Her hands tightened around her teacup. He knows what Mr. Caldwell is, what he's always been. Would he help us? Help you? Mrs. Chen's laugh was bitter. Child, my Michael's been waiting 15 years for someone to ask. He was there the day the inspectors came to look at the shaft that killed Mr. Maddox's father. He saw Caldwell pay them to change their report. Evelyn's heart kicked against her ribs. He saw it. He was a filing clerk, practically invisible. Men talk around invisible people. Mrs. Chen leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. But it's not just what he saw. It's what he's been collecting. Every falsified report, every bribed official, every family that got cheated out of what they were owed. Michael's been building a file for 15 years, waiting for the right moment. Why didn't he come forward before? Because Caldwell owns the marshal, owns the judge, owns everyone who matters. Mrs. Chen's eyes were hard. But if you're building a case, if you're taking this to territorial court where Caldwell can't buy his way out, Michael will give you everything he has. They met Michael Chen at midnight in the back room of the general store, accessed through a loading dock where the shadows were deep enough to hide conspiracies. He was a slight man in his 30s with careful hands and the nervous energy of someone sitting on a secret too big to carry alone. He brought documents, boxes of them. Cole went through them with the focused intensity of a man confronting the ghost that had haunted him for 15 years. Safety reports with original findings crossed out and replaced. Payroll records showing payments to officials with no explanation. Letters from families demanding compensation, marked claim denied, in Caldwell's own hand. And at the bottom of the last box, a journal. Michael Chen's voice was quiet. My father worked in that mine. He's the one who reported the shaft was unstable, told Caldwell it needed reinforcing. Caldwell told him to get back to work. He swallowed hard. My father died in that collapse too, 23 men, including him. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Help me make it mean something. They worked through the night, organizing documents, building a case. Cole and Michael spoke in the shorthand of shared loss. Two men who'd spent 15 years carrying the weight of preventable death. Evelyn made notes, cross-referenced dates, found patterns that turned negligence into murder. As dawn approached, they had enough to bring down an empire. This goes to the territorial governor, Cole said, his voice rough with exhaustion and something that might have been hope. He's not on Caldwell's payroll. If we can get this to him. We'll need a witness, Michael interrupted. Someone who will testify under oath. Someone Caldwell can't intimidate or bribe. I'll testify. The voice came from the doorway. They all spun. A young man stood there, maybe 25, with a doctor's bag in his hand and exhaustion written across his face. Evelyn recognized him. Dr. James Fletcher, the new physician who'd set up practice in Pine Ridge 6 months ago. How long have you been listening? Cole's hand had moved to his belt, where Evelyn knew he kept a knife. Long enough. Fletcher stepped into the light, his hands raised in peace. And before you ask, I'm not here to stop you. I'm here to help. Why? Evelyn asked. Fletcher's jaw tightened. Because Caldwell brought me here to replace you, Mrs. Hart. Told me the town needed a real doctor, not some widow playing midwife. Paid me double the standard rate. I thought I was lucky. He laughed, bitter. Then I started seeing the minors, the lung diseases Caldwell's foreman calls natural causes, the injuries from equipment that should have been replaced years ago, the families living in company housing with black mold growing through the walls. He set his bag down, met their eyes one by one. I took an oath to do no harm. Working for Victor Caldwell violates that oath every single day. So yes, I'll testify. I'll tell the territorial court exactly what conditions are like in that mine, in those houses. I'll make sure they understand people are dying. Cole studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Welcome to the fight, Doctor. They finalized their plan as the sun rose over Pine Ridge Valley. Michael would continue gathering evidence, keeping his role secret. Dr. Fletcher would document current conditions, build a medical case for negligence. Cole and Evelyn would take what they had to the territorial capital, 3 days' hard ride to the north. And in the meantime, the families on the mountain would hold their ground. Cole and Evelyn slipped out of Pine Ridge before the town woke, riding hard for Ironcrest. They needed to warn the prospectors, prepare them for whatever retaliation Caldwell might launch when he realized his expansion was being contested. But they were 2 days too late. The smoke was visible from 5 miles out, a dark column against the morning sky. Cole kicked his horse into a gallop, Evelyn right behind him, both of them knowing in their bones what they were about to find. The Reeves cabin was rubble. So were 3 others. The clearing where they'd held the meeting was trampled by horses, the snow stained with blood. Dutch met them at the northern edge of the settlement, his face grim. Caldwell's men came through yesterday, 20 of them, armed to the teeth. Said we had 24 hours to clear out or they'd burn us out. Emma Reeves? Evelyn's voice came out strangled. She's alive. But the baby? Dutch stopped, shook his head. You need to see her. She's asking for you. Evelyn found Emma in one of the surviving cabins, lying on a pallet with blood seeping through the blankets beneath her. Tom knelt beside her, his face shattered. Their 3 children huddled in the corner, silent with shock. Mrs. Maddox. Emma's voice was a whisper. The baby's coming. It's too early. Something's wrong. Evelyn's hands were already moving, examining, assessing. What she found made her blood run cold. Emma was in premature labor brought on by stress and violence. The baby was breech, and there was too much blood. This was the nightmare scenario, the one that had killed Evelyn's own child 7 years ago. Tom, she kept her voice level, professional. I need you to take the children outside, now. He started to protest. Emma grabbed his hand. Do what she says, please. The next 6 hours were the longest of Evelyn's life. She worked with hands that remembered failure, with a heart that had been broken by this exact situation. She worked while Emma screamed, while blood soaked through everything, while the baby's heartbeat grew fainter. She worked, and she refused to let history repeat. Cole appeared at some point with hot water and clean cloths. Dr. Fletcher arrived from somewhere. Later, Evelyn would learn he'd ridden through the night when Michael sent word. Together, they did things that textbooks said were impossible. And somehow, impossibly, the baby lived. A tiny girl, born 2 months early, small enough to fit in Evelyn's 2 hands. She didn't cry at first, and that silence was the worst sound Evelyn had ever heard. But then Fletcher cleared her airways and she gasped, and that gasp became a thin wail, and Emma Reeves wept with relief. Emma, however, was dying. Evelyn knew it even as she worked to stop the bleeding, knew it in the way Emma's skin had gone gray, in the weak pulse, in the blood that kept coming no matter what they did. She'd seen it before. She knew how this ended. How long? Emma's voice was barely audible. Evelyn wanted to lie. Couldn't make herself do it. Hours, maybe less. Let me hold her. They placed the baby in Emma's arms, that impossibly small miracle wrapped in blankets. Emma looked down at her daughter with eyes that were already seen beyond this world. Her name is Hope, Emma whispered. Tell her I tried. Tell her I wanted to stay. You're going to tell her yourself, Tom said desperately. You're going to fight this. I'm so tired, Tom. Emma's eyes drifted closed, so tired of fighting. She died as the sun set, with her husband holding her hand and her daughter sleeping on her chest. The last thing she said was a whisper so soft Evelyn almost missed it. Make them pay. Tom Reeves became a different man in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The desperation burned away, leaving something harder, colder. He looked at Cole with eyes that had nothing left to lose. When do we ride on Caldwell? We don't, Cole's voice was firm. We take him down legally, with evidence. We make sure he can't hurt anyone else. He killed my wife. And he'll answer for it. But not like this. Not in a way that gets more people killed. Cole gripped Tom's shoulder. Trust me. I've wanted revenge for 15 years. But this is bigger than revenge. This is justice. Evelyn held baby Hope in her arms, this tiny life born from violence and loss. She thought about Emma's last words. Thought about all the families Caldwell had destroyed over the years. We ride for the territorial capital tomorrow, she said quietly. We bring them everything we have, and we make Victor Caldwell face what he's done. That night, the Mountain families buried Emma Reeves in ground so frozen they had to use pickaxes to break through. They sang hymns in the darkness, these hard people who'd carved lives from stone and ice. They mourned a woman they'd known for years, and they swore oaths that the territory would hear. Evelyn stood beside Cole, his hand finding hers in the darkness. She thought about the life they were building together, this partnership forged in honesty and choice. Thought about how quickly everything could change, how fragile peace really was. We're doing the right thing, Cole said, reading her thoughts. I know. She squeezed his hand, but Emma's still dead. Yes, and we're going to make sure she's the last one. They left at dawn, carrying documents that could topple an empire and a baby who'd lost her mother before she'd had a chance to know her. Tom Reeves stayed behind with his remaining children, his face set with the patience of a man who'd learned to wait for justice. The ride to the territorial capital would take 3 days through winter mountains. 3 days where anything could happen. 3 days where Caldwell's men could catch them, where the evidence could be lost, where the whole fragile plan could collapse. But as Evelyn looked back at the mountain communities standing together in the morning light, she felt something she hadn't felt in 7 years. Hope. They made it 15 miles before Caldwell's men found them. The ambush came at a narrow pass where the trail squeezed between 2 granite walls, the kind of place where tactical advantage belonged to whoever got there first. Cole saw the glint of rifle barrels, a heartbeat before the first shot cracked through the frozen air. Down! He yanked Evelyn from her saddle as the bullet whined past where her head had been. They hit the snow hard, Cole's body covering hers, the horses screaming and bolting, the saddlebags with all their evidence scattered across the trail. 4 men emerged from the rocks above, rifles trained down. Evelyn recognized the leader, Frank Briggs, Caldwell's foreman, a man with dead eyes and a reputation for making problems disappear. "Mr. Caldwell sends his regards," Briggs called down, his voice echoing off stone. "Says you've been sticking your nose where it don't belong, Maddox. Time to clip that nose right off." Cole's hand had found his revolver, but the angles were wrong. 4 rifles against 1 pistol, high ground versus low, no cover worth mentioning. Evelyn felt his body tense with the mathematics of suicide. "The evidence is already gone," she shouted, improvising desperately. "We sent copies to the territorial governor 3 days ago. Killing us won't change anything." Briggs laughed. "Nice try, Mrs. Maddox, but we got eyes in Pine Ridge. Know you were collecting papers right up until yesterday. Know you're carrying them now." He sighted down his rifle. "Mr. Caldwell wants those documents. You can hand them over peaceful-like, or we can pry them from your frozen corpses. Either way works for me." The world crystallized into a single moment of terrible clarity. Evelyn could feel Cole's heart hammering against her back, could smell gunpowder and horse sweat and her own fear, could see the next 60 seconds playing out, the shots, the blood, the end of everything they'd been trying to build. Then Baby Hope cried. The sound cut through the standoff like a knife through silk. Hope, strapped to Evelyn's chest in a makeshift sling, had woken from the chaos and announced her displeasure with the piercing wail of the very young and very angry. Briggs hesitated. Just for a second, something human flickered across his dead eyes. "You brought a baby." "Emma Reeves' daughter," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the terror singing through her veins. "Born 2 days ago, her mother died from injuries your men caused when you burned down her home." She stood slowly, carefully, making sure all 4 rifles could see the infant against her chest. "You want to shoot a woman holding a newborn? That the kind of man you are, Frank?" The foreman's jaw worked. Behind him, one of the other men lowered his rifle slightly. Evelyn pressed her advantage. "Victor Caldwell already has Emma's blood on his hands. You want to add her orphaned baby to that count? Because that's the story people will tell. Not that you were following orders, that you murdered a woman and an infant in cold blood on a mountain pass." "The documents," Briggs said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Our insurance." Cole had risen to stand beside Evelyn, his hands visible and empty. "You shoot us. That evidence gets delivered anyway. We don't make it to the territorial capital by Friday. Michael Chen has instructions to send everything to every newspaper between here and Washington. Your boss's name will be poison." It was a bluff. A complete, desperate bluff. But Briggs didn't know that. Mr. Caldwell said, "Mr. Caldwell is sitting comfortable in Pine Ridge while you're up here freezing your ass off doing his dirty work." Cole's voice hardened. "You really want to hang for him? Because that's where this ends if you pull those triggers. Murder of a woman, a baby, and a man with witnesses who'll testify. Territorial law doesn't forgive that, no matter how much money your boss has." Silence stretched across the pass, broken only by Hope's diminishing whimpers as Evelyn rocked her gently. 4 men with rifles weighed their souls against their paychecks and tried to decide which was worth more. Finally, Briggs lowered his weapon. Get out of here. And Maddox? Don't come back to Pine Ridge. Next time, Mr. Caldwell won't send me. He'll send someone who don't have a conscience. They gathered their scattered belongings with shaking hands and rode on, not stopping until the pass was 5 miles behind them and Evelyn's legs would no longer hold her upright. She dismounted in a rush and vomited into the snow, her whole body trembling with delayed shock. Cole held her hair back, his free hand rubbing circles on her back. You're all right. We're all right. We almost died. But we didn't. He helped her sit, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. That thing you did with the baby, that was smart thinking. That was desperation. Evelyn looked down at Hope, who'd fallen back asleep with the oblivious peace of the very young. I used a dead woman's child as a shield, Cole. What does that make me? Alive? His hand found hers. It makes you alive. And it means Emma's daughter still has a chance at a life. You think Emma would have wanted anything different? Evelyn didn't answer. She just held Hope closer and tried not to think about how close they'd come to joining Emma in frozen ground. They reached the territorial capital 2 days later, half frozen and exhausted. Helena was a new city, rough and raw, built on mining wealth and territorial ambition. The governor's mansion sat on a hill overlooking the chaos, a statement in timber and glass that said civilization had come to the frontier, whether the frontier wanted it or not. Governor William Harrison received them in his office, a room lined with law books and territorial maps. He was a barrel-chested man in his 50s, with sharp eyes and the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned that politics was a knife fight in the dark. Mr. Maddox, Mrs. Maddox. He gestured to chairs. I'll be honest. When I heard you were coming with evidence against Victor Caldwell, I assumed it would be the usual complaints. Poor working conditions, unfair wages, things that technically aren't illegal even if they're morally questionable. His eyes dropped to the boxes Cole was unloading onto his desk. I'm hoping you've brought me something more substantial. Murder, Cole said flatly. Fraud, bribery of territorial officials, falsification of safety records that led to the deaths of 23 men. And that's just what we can prove with documents. There's 15 years of additional crimes we can testify to. Harrison's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. That's a serious accusation against a man who's contributed significant funds to territorial development. That's a factual statement about a man who's been getting away with murder because people are too scared or too bought to stop him. Evelyn leaned forward. Governor Harrison, I've been a midwife in Pine Ridge for 7 years. I've delivered the babies of miners' wives who live in company housing with black mold growing through the walls. I've treated men with lung diseases who can't afford to quit working because Caldwell owns their debt. And 2 days ago, I watched a woman die from injuries she sustained when Caldwell's men burned down her home because her husband wouldn't abandon his legal mining claim. She lifted Hope from the sling, held the sleeping infant where Harrison could see her. This is Emma Reeves's daughter. She's 4 days old. She'll never know her mother because Victor Caldwell decided property rights matter more than human lives. Harrison looked at the baby for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. Show me what you have. They spent 6 hours laying out the case. Michael Chen's meticulously organized documents painting a picture of systematic corruption. Dr. Fletcher's medical reports documenting conditions that bordered on criminal negligence. Cole's testimony about his father's death and the investigation that had been buried. Evelyn's account of Emma's death and the violence on the mountain. Harrison took notes, asked sharp questions, occasionally disappeared to consult with the territorial attorney general. As afternoon faded into evening, Evelyn watched him transform from skeptical politician to something harder, angrier. This is enough, he said finally. This is more than enough. I can have warrants issued by morning. Caldwell will run, Cole said. The second he hears about warrants, he'll be on a train to California or Mexico. Then we move fast. Harrison stood, began pacing. I'll send territorial marshals to Pine Ridge tonight. They'll arrest Caldwell and his key associates before dawn. We'll need you both to testify at trial, of course. What about the families on the mountain? Evelyn asked. Caldwell's men are still up there, still threatening them. The warrants will cover anyone who participated in the violence. Your mountain families will be under territorial protection. Harrison's expression was grim. Though I'll be honest, Caldwell has a lot of powerful friends. The trial won't be easy. His lawyers will fight every charge, attack every witness. You need to be prepared for that. Cole's jaw set. We've been preparing for 15 years. They left the governor's mansion as night fell over Helena, carrying arrest warrants that felt like weapons in their hands. The territorial marshals would ride for Pine Ridge within the hour. By morning, Victor Caldwell would be in custody. Or he'd be gone. Evelyn tried not to think about that possibility as they found lodging at a boarding house near the Capitol. Tried not to imagine Caldwell escaping justice the way powerful men always seem to escape justice. Tried to focus on the fact that they'd done everything they could, but sleep wouldn't come. She lay in the narrow bed with hope cradled against her chest, listening to the baby's soft breathing and the distant sounds of the city. Cole had taken the floor, refusing the bed despite her protests. She could hear him shifting restlessly in the darkness. "You awake?" she whispered. "Yeah." "What are you thinking about?" Long silence. Then, "My father," wondering if this would be enough for him, if 23 dead men can ever really be avenged. Evelyn thought about that, about justice and revenge and the difference between them, about whether the dead cared if their killers faced consequences, or if justice was really just something the living needed to keep going. "I think," she said slowly, "that your father would be proud of what you've built, the ranch, the life, the fact that you didn't let Caldwell turn you into something bitter and broken." "I am bitter." "You're honest. That's different." She paused. "And you rode down from your mountain to help people you didn't know because it was the right thing to do. That's not bitter. That's brave." She heard him shift, saw his silhouette rise in the darkness. He sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle the baby. "When I came to your door that night," he said quietly, "I told myself it was practical, that I needed a partner for the ranch. But the truth is, I'd been watching you for months, seeing the way you carried yourself, the way you saved people and then went home to that empty cabin and never complained, never asked for anything." His hand found hers in the darkness. "I thought if I could have just a piece of that strength, maybe I could stop hiding." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I wasn't strong. I was surviving." Sometimes they're the same thing. His thumb traced circles on her palm. "You've made me want to be more than I was. Want to fight instead of hide. That's worth more than I can say." "Cole," he leaned down and kissed her. It was tentative, careful, a question more than a statement. Evelyn's free hand came up to cup his face, her answer clear. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "I know I said this was a practical arrangement, no expectations, but somewhere along the way, I know," Evelyn's voice was soft. "Somewhere along the way, it became real." They didn't sleep together that night. Hope was between them, literally and figuratively, and neither of them was quite ready to cross that final bridge. But Cole stayed on the bed, his hand in Evelyn's, and they talked until dawn about futures they were just beginning to imagine. The marshals returned 3 days later. Evelyn knew something was wrong the moment she saw their faces. The lead marshal, a grizzled man named Wade Cooper, looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 days. "We got him," he said without preamble, "but it wasn't clean." They gathered in the governor's office to hear the full report. Caldwell had indeed tried to run. When the marshals arrived at his Pine Ridge mansion, they'd found him burning documents in the fireplace, his bags already packed. He'd resisted arrest, pulled a gun, forced the marshals to return fire. "He's alive," Cooper clarified. "Took a bullet to the shoulder, but he's in custody, and he's talking." A grim smile. "Turns out facing a murder charge makes men real chatty about their co-conspirators." Over the next week, the full scope of Caldwell's operation unraveled. The mine foreman who'd been bribing safety inspectors, the company doctor who'd been falsifying death certificates, the territorial judge who'd been ruling in Caldwell's favor in exchange for regular payments. The web of corruption ran so deep that Governor Harrison had to bring in outside prosecutors just to ensure a fair trial. Through it all, Evelyn and Cole remained in Helena, living in the boarding house and preparing for the testimony they'd have to give. Dr. Fletcher arrived from Pine Ridge, along with Michael Chen and a dozen miners willing to speak about conditions in Caldwell's operations. The case against the mine owner grew from substantial to overwhelming. But the defense fought back hard. Caldwell's lawyers were expensive, experienced, and utterly ruthless. They attacked every witness, questioned every document, suggested that disgruntled employees and vindictive competitors were orchestrating a conspiracy to destroy an innocent businessman. "They're going to come after you especially hard," the territorial attorney general warned Evelyn. "A woman testifying against a powerful man. They'll try to make you look emotional, unreliable, possibly even vindictive over some imagined slight." "Let them try," Evelyn said coldly. The trial began on a February morning so cold the windows of the courthouse were frosted over. The gallery was packed with people who'd traveled from every corner of the territory, miners and their families, victims of Caldwell's various schemes, journalists from newspapers as far away as San Francisco and Chicago. Cole testified first, his account of his father's death delivered in the same flat, honest voice he used for everything. The defense tried to paint him as a grudge holder, someone whose 15-year obsession had invented crimes where none existed. But Cole had documents, had witnesses, had the weight of truth on his side. Dr. Fletcher testified next, his medical expertise lending credibility to the claims of systemic negligence. He brought photographs of miners with black lung, of children living in company housing with respiratory infections, of the conditions that Caldwell had allowed to persist in the name of profit. Michael Chen's testimony was devastating. He'd spent 15 years documenting every bribe, every falsified report, every cover-up. When the defense tried to suggest he'd fabricated evidence, Chen calmly produced the original documents, many of them in Caldwell's own handwriting. But it was Evelyn's testimony that broke the case open. She took the stand on the fourth day of trial, wearing a simple dress and carrying hope in her arms. The defense immediately objected to the baby's presence, calling it a sympathy ploy. The judge overruled them. The prosecutor led her through her qualifications as a midwife, her 7 years of experience, the dozens of families she'd helped. Then he asked about Emma Reeves. Evelyn told Emma's story with the clinical precision of a medical professional and the emotional truth of someone who'd held a dying woman's hand. She described the pregnancy, the malnutrition caused by Caldwell's men scaring off game, the violence that had triggered premature labor. She described the 6-hour fight to save both mother and child, the impossible choices, the moment when Emma had looked at her daughter and named her Hope before dying. "And in your professional medical opinion, Mrs. Maddox, what caused Emma Reeves' death?" "The immediate cause was hemorrhaging from traumatic premature labor. The underlying cause was the violence perpetrated by Victor Caldwell's employees when they burned down her home." Evelyn looked directly at Caldwell, who sat at the defense table with his arm in a sling and murder in his eyes. "Emma Reeves died because this man valued silver more than human life. Her daughter will grow up without a mother because profit mattered more than people." The defense attorney, a slick man from Denver named Harrison Blackwood, approached her with the confidence of someone who'd demolished plenty of female witnesses before. "Mrs. Maddox, isn't it true that you have a personal grudge against Mr. Caldwell? That your husband was run out of Pine Ridge 15 years ago and you've been waiting for a chance at revenge?" "I didn't meet my husband until a few months ago. And yes, Cole Maddox has every right to want justice for his father's murder. That doesn't make the evidence false." "You call it murder. The official investigation called it an unfortunate accident." "The official investigation was bought and paid for by the defendant. Michael Chen's testimony established that conclusively." Blackwood's smile thinned. "You're quite confident in your medical opinions, aren't you? Despite having no formal medical training, no degree from an accredited institution. I have 7 years of practical experience and a perfect survival rate for both mothers and infants under my care. How many lives have you saved, Mr. Blackwood?" A ripple of laughter ran through the gallery. The judge gavelled for order. Blackwood's expression hardened. "Let's talk about this perfect survival rate. Isn't it true that you yourself lost a child 7 years ago, that you were unable to save your own baby?" The courtroom went silent. Evelyn felt the air leave her lungs, felt the old wound tear open. Beside the prosecutor's table, Cole was half out of his seat, his face murderous. But Evelyn held up a hand, stopping him. She looked at Blackwood with eyes that had seen too much death to be afraid of this man's cruelty. Yes, I lost my son during a complicated birth. My husband died 3 days later from influenza. I spent 7 years believing I was broken because I couldn't save them. She shifted hope in her arms, the baby's warm weight and anchor. But every woman I've helped since then, every child I've brought safely into this world, they're proof that tragedy doesn't define us, that we can survive the worst things and still choose to help people. She leaned forward, her voice dropping but carrying to every corner of the silent courtroom. You're trying to make me look weak, Mr. Blackwood, trying to use my grief as a weapon against my credibility. But here's what you don't understand. My scars are exactly what make me qualified to testify, because I know what loss looks like. I know the difference between unavoidable tragedy and preventable death. And Emma Reeves' death was preventable. Victor Caldwell killed her as surely as if he'd pulled a trigger. Blackwood tried a few more angles, but the damage was done. Evelyn's testimony had given the jury something more powerful than documents or technical evidence. It had given them a human story, a reason to care. When she stepped down from the witness stand 3 hours later, her hands were shaking, but her voice had never wavered. The trial lasted 2 more weeks. More witnesses testified. More evidence was presented. Caldwell's lawyers fought with the desperation of men who knew their client was guilty, but were being paid too much to care. But in the end, truth had weight. Justice, for once, had teeth. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. When they returned, the foreman read the verdict in a voice that shook with the magnitude of what they were doing. Guilty. On all counts, murder, fraud, bribery, criminal negligence. Victor Caldwell, the man who'd ruled Pine Ridge Valley like a personal kingdom for 20 years, stood in shackles as the judge handed down a sentence that would keep him in territorial prison for the rest of his natural life. The courtroom erupted. People wept. Minors embraced. Evelyn felt Cole's arms around her, felt him shaking with 15 years of grief finally finding release. It's over, he whispered into her hair. It's finally over. But it wasn't. Not quite. 3 days after the verdict, as they were preparing to return to Ironcrest Mountain, a woman appeared at their boarding house. She was young, maybe 25, well-dressed, and absolutely terrified. Mrs. Maddox, my name is Catherine Winters, Sarah Winters' sister-in-law. She twisted her hands together. I need to speak with you about something I found in Victor Caldwell's office. They met in the boarding house parlor. Catherine produced a ledger, her hand shaking as she opened it. I worked as Mr. Caldwell's personal secretary. After his arrest, the marshals asked me to help organize his business records for seizure. She swallowed hard. I found this hidden in a false bottom of his desk. It's a list of payments to people all over the territory. Evelyn took the ledger, began reading. What she found made her blood run cold. Judges, marshals, territorial representatives, even a deputy governor, all on Caldwell's payroll, all taking regular payments in exchange for favorable rulings, ignored complaints, blocked investigations. This is worse than we thought, Cole breathed, reading over her shoulder. There's more. Catherine's voice was barely a whisper. The last entry. Look at the last entry. Evelyn turned to the final page. The most recent payment, dated just 2 weeks before Caldwell's arrest, a sum of $5,000 paid to someone identified only by initials. W.H. William Harrison, the governor. The room tilted. Evelyn felt reality reorganizing itself around this new, terrible truth. The man who'd helped them, who'd issued the warrants, who'd promised justice, was he on Caldwell's payroll too? It could be someone else, Cole said, but his voice lacked conviction. There's a note in the margin, Catherine said. In Caldwell's handwriting, it says insurance policy renewed, and Mr. Caldwell always called Governor Harrison his insurance policy. Said if anything ever went wrong, the governor would make it go away. Evelyn's mind raced. If Harrison was compromised, did that mean the trial had been a sham? Would the conviction stand? Or had they just handed Caldwell the perfect grounds for appeal? We need to take this to the Attorney General, Cole said. If Harrison's corrupt, and we accuse him without absolute proof, he'll bury us, Evelyn interrupted. We need to be smart about this. They spent the night strategizing. By morning, they had a plan. Instead of going directly to the Attorney General, they took the ledger to the Territorial Marshal Service, to Wade Cooper specifically. He'd been the one to arrest Caldwell, had risked his life to see justice done. If anyone could be trusted, it was him. Cooper looked at the ledger with the expression of a man watching his faith in government die in real time. "If this is accurate, it needs to be verified," Evelyn said. "Carefully, quietly. If Harrison gets wind that we're investigating him, he'll make it all disappear." Cooper closed the ledger, his jaw set. "Leave this with me. Don't tell anyone else you found it. Don't even hint at it. Go back to your mountain and wait." "For what?" Cole demanded. "For me to either clear the governor's name or end his career." Cooper met their eyes. Either way, Caldwell's conviction stands. The evidence was too strong, the jury too convinced. But if Harrison's dirty, we need to know. This territory can't heal if corruption runs that deep. They returned to Ironcrest Mountain a week later, carrying hope and questions they couldn't answer. The journey felt longer somehow, weighted by the knowledge that their fight might not be over after all. But the mountain welcomed them home. The families they'd fought for had rebuilt their cabins. Tom Reeves met them on the trail, his children healthy and his grief beginning to soften around the edges. "Thank you," he said simply, taking Hope into his arms. "For everything." Evelyn watched father and daughter together and felt something shift in her chest. They'd done this. They'd fought an empire and won. They'd given these families their lives back. Whatever happened with Harrison, they'd done that much. That night, alone in their house on Ironcrest, Cole and Evelyn finally crossed the last bridge between partnership and marriage. They came together with the slow certainty of people who'd chosen each other deliberately, honestly, without illusions. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Cole's heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Evelyn thought about the journey that had brought them here, about empty arms and second chances, about how love wasn't always romance and lightning. Sometimes it was just two broken people deciding to face winters together. "I love you," she said into the darkness. Cole's arms tightened around her. "I know. I love you too." "When did you know?" "The moment you used a baby as a shield against 4 armed men and then negotiated our way out like you were discussing the weather." She felt him smile against her hair. "That's when I knew I'd married someone extraordinary." "I was terrified." "You were magnificent." He shifted so he could see her face in the moonlight. "You're the strongest person I've ever met, Evelyn Maddox. And I'm grateful every day that you took a chance on a bitter mountain man with a grudge." "Best decision I ever made," she whispered, and meant it. Outside, winter still held the mountain in its grip. But inside, for the first time in either of their lives, they were exactly where they belonged. Spring came to Ironcrest Mountain like a promise kept. The snow retreated up the peaks, revealing meadows that exploded with wildflowers overnight. Streams that had been frozen silent for months roared back to life. The world turned green and gold and possible again. But the thaw brought more than just wildflowers. It brought Wade Cooper, riding up the mountain trail with news that would reshape everything. Evelyn was in the garden behind the house, teaching Hope to grab at dandelion fluff, when she heard the horse. The baby was 4 months old now, fat and healthy, spending her days passed between the mountain families like a shared treasure. Tom Reeves had asked Evelyn and Cole to be her guardians, saying he couldn't raise a daughter alone while working his claim. They'd agreed without hesitation. Cole emerged from the barn, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle he still kept close. Old habits died hard. But when he recognized Cooper, his posture relaxed marginally. "Marshal, didn't expect to see you up here." Cooper dismounted, looking like he'd aged another 10 years since they'd last met. "We need to talk. All 3 of you." His eyes found Evelyn. "You'll want to hear this sitting down." They gathered in the kitchen, Hope gurgling contentedly on Evelyn's lap. Cooper refused the coffee Cole offered, just sat at their table with his hat in his hands and the weight of justice on his shoulders. "Governor Harrison resigned yesterday, effective immediately." The words dropped into the room like stones into still water. Evelyn felt her breath catch. "The ledger?" "Was accurate. Every payment documented, every bribe verified." We traced the money through 3 different banks before Harrison's lawyers convinced him that fighting it would only make things worse. Cooper's expression was grim. He took a deal, resigned his position, forfeited his assets, agreed to never hold public office again. In exchange, no criminal prosecution. That's not justice, Cole said, his voice hard. No, it's politics. Cooper met his eyes. But it means the corruption ends here. Harrison's lieutenant governor is clean. We investigated her thoroughly. She'll serve out the term, and the territory will have fresh elections in November. It's not perfect, but it's a start. What about Caldwell's conviction? Evelyn asked. Does Harrison's involvement compromise it? The Attorney General reviewed every piece of evidence, every witness testimony. The conviction stands. Harrison may have helped initially, but the case was solid regardless of his involvement. Caldwell stays in prison for the rest of his life. Evelyn felt something unknot in her chest. They'd done it. Despite the corruption, despite the odds, they'd actually done it. Cooper wasn't finished. There's more. The territorial government is seizing all of Caldwell's holdings, the mine, the company houses, the land grants, all of it. Which brings me to why I'm really here. He pulled a document from his coat. The new lieutenant governor wants to know what should be done with it all. Specifically, she wants your input. Cole took the document, read it slowly. His eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. She's offering us the mine? Not exactly. She's proposing to turn it into a cooperative. The miners who worked it would own shares, make decisions collectively, split the profits fairly. But it needs management, people the workers trust, people who understand what it's like to be crushed under someone else's boot. Cooper paused. She wants you two to oversee the transition. Make sure it's done right. Evelyn felt the room tilt. They were being offered the chance to reshape Pine Ridge Valley from the ground up, to turn Caldwell's empire of exploitation into something better. We're ranchers, Cole said slowly. We don't know anything about running a mine. You know about fairness, about treating people like humans instead of resources. Cooper leaned forward. The workers are asking for you specifically, Maddox. They remember your father. They remember what Caldwell did to your family. They trust you to make it right. What about the mountain families? Evelyn asked. The people we fought to protect? The land grant Caldwell was using to displace them has been invalidated. Their claims are recognized as legitimate. They can stay, work their land, raise their families. Cooper's expression softened slightly. You did that. You gave them their lives back. Cole looked at Evelyn. She could see the conflict in his eyes, the part of him that wanted to stay hidden on their mountain, and the part that had learned to fight for something bigger than personal peace. What do you think? He asked her. Evelyn thought about the 7 years she'd spent in Pine Ridge, delivering babies and treating injuries and watching good people ground down by a system designed to exploit them. Thought about Emma Reeves, dying in blood and firelight because she'd dared to stand her ground. Thought about all the children growing up in company housing who deserved better. I think, she said slowly, that we didn't fight this hard just to walk away. If we can actually change things, make Pine Ridge into the kind of place where families can thrive instead of just survive, we have to try. Cole's hand found hers across the table. It'll mean leaving the ranch, at least for a while, spending time in the valley, dealing with people and problems, and all the complicated things I've been avoiding for 15 years. We'll do it together, same as everything else. He squeezed her hand, then turned to Cooper. Tell the lieutenant governor we'll do it. On one condition. Name it. Dr. Fletcher stays as the valley physician, and the cooperative hires him at a fair wage, with funds set aside for medical supplies and a proper clinic. No more people dying from preventable diseases because they can't afford treatment. Cooper's smile was tired but genuine. I think that can be arranged. They moved to Pine Ridge 2 weeks later, not permanently but regularly. Cole spent 3 days a week in the valley working with the miners to restructure operations, while Evelyn divided her time between the mountain families and establishing a real medical practice in town. Hope came with them everywhere, passed between workers' wives and mountain women, growing up surrounded by the community her mother's death had helped protect. The transformation of Pine Ridge Valley didn't happen overnight. There were setbacks, arguments, moments when old resentments threatened to tear everything apart. Some of Caldwell's former employees resented the changes. Some miners didn't trust that the cooperative model would really be different. Some townspeople thought Cole and Evelyn were troublemakers who'd destroyed a pillar of the community. But slowly, painfully, things changed. The mine reopened under new management, with safety protocols that actually meant something. Workers elected representatives to make decisions about operations and profit distribution. The company housing was renovated, the black mold scrubbed away, the leaking roofs repaired. Families who'd been living in debt for generations found themselves with actual wages, actual choices. Dr. Fletcher's clinic became the heart of the valley's transformation. With proper funding and Evelyn's assistance, he could finally practice medicine the way he'd always wanted, treating people regardless of their ability to pay, focusing on prevention as much as cure, training local women in basic medical care so every family had access to help. One afternoon in late summer, Evelyn was in the clinic helping Fletcher set a broken arm when Sarah Winters appeared in the doorway. She looked healthier than Evelyn had seen her since the birth, her daughter balanced on her hip, her face bright with something that looked like hope. "Mrs. Maddox, do you have a moment?" Evelyn finished wrapping the splint, gave the patient instructions for care, then stepped outside with Sarah. The main street of Pine Ridge had changed in subtle ways over the past months. Fresh paint on storefronts, children playing without the haunted look that came from chronic hunger, miners walking with their heads up instead of their shoulders hunched against invisible blows. "I wanted to thank you," Sarah said. "Jim's been elected to the mine safety committee. He's making twice what he did under Caldwell, and he comes home every night knowing he'll come home the next night too." Her eyes shone with tears. "You gave us a future. I don't know how to repay that." "You already have." Evelyn touched the baby's cheek gently. "Every healthy child, every family that doesn't have to choose between food and medicine, that's the repayment. That's what we fought for." Sarah left smiling, and Evelyn stood on the clinic steps watching the valley go about its business. Cole emerged from the mine office across the street, deep in conversation with Tom Reeves and Dutch. The three men had formed an unlikely leadership team, Tom's cautious optimism balancing Dutch's skepticism and Cole's quiet authority. He caught her eye and smiled, that small private smile that was just for her. 8 months married, and she still felt her heart kick when he looked at her like that. That night, they returned to Ironcrest Mountain, Hope asleep in the sling against Evelyn's chest. The ranch was still their home, still the place they retreated to when the valley's demands became too much. But it no longer felt like hiding. It felt like sanctuary. "There's something I need to tell you," Evelyn said as they were getting ready for bed. Her hands shook slightly as she undressed Hope, laid the baby in the cradle Cole had carved from pine. "I wasn't sure at first. Didn't want to hope. But I've been sick the past few mornings, and I'm late, and—" Cole crossed the room in 2 strides, his hands finding her shoulders. "You're pregnant?" "I think so." "I don't know how it's possible. Dr. Morrison said I'd never—" Her voice broke. "Cole, what if I can't carry to term? What if it's like before?" He pulled her against his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "Then we'll face it together, same as everything else. But Evelyn—" He leaned back so he could see her face. "You're not the same woman who lost a baby 7 years ago. You're stronger. You know more. And this time, you're not alone. I'm terrified. I know. But you're also the woman who stared down 4 armed men with a baby on her chest. The woman who testified against Victor Caldwell and made a whole courtroom believe in justice. If anyone can do this, it's you." The pregnancy progressed carefully, cautiously. Evelyn monitored herself with the obsessive attention of someone who knew exactly what could go wrong. Dr. Fletcher examined her weekly, his professional optimism fighting her medical knowledge of all the things that could still go sideways. But weeks became months, and she stayed healthy. The baby grew. Her body, that had failed her once, seemed determined to prove it could succeed. The Mountain families celebrated each milestone with the fierce protectiveness of people who'd lost too much already. The valley workers' wives brought her food, shared their own pregnancy stories, reminded her that bodies were resilient and life had a way of persisting despite the odds. Cole became almost unbearably protective. He shortened his trips to Pine Ridge, refused to let her ride rough terrain, watched her with the intensity of someone who'd learned that happiness could be stolen in a heartbeat. I'm not made of glass, she told him one evening, laughing as he insisted on carrying firewood. She was perfectly capable of carrying herself. I know, but that's my child you're carrying, and the woman I love. Let me fuss. She let him fuss. At 6 months pregnant, Evelyn was helping deliver twins for one of the mountain families when complications arose. The first baby came easily enough, but the second was breech, and the mother was exhausted. Evelyn worked for 3 hours in conditions that would have made a city surgeon weep, using every trick she'd learned in 7 years of frontier medicine. She saved them. Both babies, pink and screaming and alive. The mother, exhausted but whole. And as Evelyn cleaned her instruments afterward, her own baby kicking strongly beneath her ribs, she felt something shift. The old fear that had lived in her chest since losing her son, it didn't disappear, but it loosened, became manageable. She'd survived the worst thing. She'd rebuilt herself. And maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to hope for the best thing. Winter came again to Ironcrest Mountain, gentler this time. Evelyn was 8 months pregnant when the first snow fell, heavy and soft, turning the world into something magical. Cole had stopped going to Pine Ridge altogether. The cooperative was running smoothly under Tom Reeves's steady management. Dr. Fletcher's clinic was thriving. The valley had learned to govern itself, had discovered that communities could function without someone's boot on their neck. Their work there was done, not finished. Transformation was never finished, but done enough that they could step back and let others carry it forward. Tom Reeves came up the mountain for Christmas, bringing hope and a small army of mountain families who decided that the Maddox Ranch was the perfect place for a celebration. They brought food, music, stories. They brought the kind of joy that came from surviving the unsurvivable together. Hope was walking now, tottering between adults with the fearless confidence of a child who'd never known anything but love. She called Evelyn and Cole Mama and Papa with the certainty of someone who'd never questioned that they were hers. Emma would have loved this, Tom said quietly, watching his daughter dance to fiddle music with Dutch's granddaughter. Would have loved seeing her baby surrounded by all this life. I think, Evelyn said gently, she does see it, wherever she is. That night, after the guests had departed and the house was quiet, Evelyn felt the first contraction. She said nothing at first, just breathed through it, timing it, assessing. When the second one came 20 minutes later, she touched Cole's arm. It's time. His face went pale. But you have another month. Babies come when they're ready, and this one's ready. She smiled, trying to project a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Get Dr. Fletcher from the valley. And the women, Mrs. Chen, Sarah Winters, anyone who can get here quickly. I don't want to do this alone. Cole rode down the mountain at a pace that would have terrified Evelyn if she'd been watching. But she was busy preparing, laying out instruments, building up the fire, doing all the mechanical things that kept her mind from spiraling into fear. Fletcher arrived within 2 hours, riding behind Cole with his medical bag clutched against his chest like a holy relic. The mountain women came shortly after. Mrs. Chen and Sarah Winters, Dutch's wife Margaret, 3 others who'd learned midwifery from Evelyn herself. They surrounded her with competence and care, these women who understood that birth was a battle, and sometimes the battlefield needed witnesses. The labor lasted 14 hours. 14 hours of pain that remade the world into something primal and essential. 14 hours of Cole holding her hand, whispering encouragement, being the anchor she needed. Dr. Fletcher monitored everything with the careful attention of someone who knew they were fighting medical history. Every hour that passed without complications was a small victory. Every strong heartbeat was proof that maybe, this time, things would be different. When the final push came, when Evelyn felt her son slide into the world, when that first cry split the air, she wept. Fletcher placed the baby on her chest, this impossibly small person with Cole's dark hair and her own determined chin. The baby was early but healthy, his lungs announcing his displeasure at leaving the warm darkness. "You did it," Cole whispered, his own face wet with tears. "You brought him home." Evelyn looked at her son, this miracle she'd never thought she'd have, thought about the child she'd lost, the grief she'd carried, the 7 years of believing she was broken, thought about the mountain man who'd seen her scars and called them strength. "What do we name him?" she asked. Cole touched the baby's tiny hand, watched those perfect fingers curl around his own. When he spoke, his voice was thick with 15 years of grief finally finding peace. James, after my father, after the man Victor Caldwell killed, after the reason we fought. He looked at Evelyn, his eyes full of everything words couldn't hold. So he knows where he came from, so he knows what justice costs. James Maddox opened his eyes and looked at his parents with the solemn intensity of the very new. Outside, snow continued to fall on Ironcrest Mountain, blanketing the world in soft silence. Hope was brought in to meet her baby brother, her small face serious as she studied this new addition to their family. "Baby," she announced with satisfaction, then promptly demanded to hold him. They let her, all of them crowding around to make sure she didn't drop her precious burden. And in that moment, Evelyn looked around at the women who'd helped her bring her son into the world, at the husband who'd chosen her when she'd believed no one would, at the daughter and son who filled her arms so completely. The woman who'd delivered half the babies in Pine Ridge Valley, whose own arms had been empty for 7 years, was suddenly, abundantly full. The weeks after James's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and small miracles. Evelyn discovered that nursing a baby while recovering from childbirth on a mountain ranch in winter required a stubbornness she hadn't known she possessed. But she had help. The mountain families rotated through, bringing meals, watching Hope, giving advice that was sometimes helpful and sometimes hilarious. Cole transformed into someone Evelyn barely recognized. The man who'd hidden from the world for 15 years became a father who sang lullabies in a voice rusty with disuse, who walked the floor at 3 a.m. with a crying infant, who changed diapers with the same careful attention he brought to everything. "You're good at this," Evelyn told him one night, watching him rock James back to sleep after a feeding. "I'm terrified," he admitted. "Every second. What if I drop him? What if I do something wrong? What if you love him and do your best and that's enough?" She reached for his hand. "That's all any of us can do." Spring arrived properly in late March, and with it came news from Pine Ridge Valley. The cooperative had turned its first profit. The workers had voted to set aside 20% for a community fund, education, medical care, support for families in need. The kind of safety net that Caldwell had never provided because it cost him money. Tom Reeves brought the news in person, along with an invitation. The Valley wanted to throw a celebration, wanted Cole and Evelyn to see what they'd helped build. "You don't have to come," Tom said quickly. "With the new baby and everything." "We'll come," Evelyn said. "I want James to see it. Want him to know what his father did, what it means to fight for people." They rode down to Pine Ridge on a May morning that smelled like possibility. James was 3 months old, content in a sling against Evelyn's chest. Hope rode in front of Cole, chattering about everything and nothing in the way of almost 2-year-olds. The valley had transformed. The company housing had been painted, repaired, winterized properly. Gardens had sprung up around each home. Children played in streets that had once been defined by despair. The mine operated on reasonable hours with real safety measures. Men came home to their families instead of coming home broken. The celebration was held in the town square, the whole valley turning out to mark the cooperative's first successful year. There were speeches, music, food enough to feed an army. And at the center of it all, a memorial. Michael Chen had designed it, a stone monument listing the 23 men who died in the collapse that had killed Cole's father. Their names carved deep, impossible to erase or forget. "We wanted to remember," Chen said quietly as Cole stood before it, James in his arms. "Wanted to make sure everyone knows what this freedom cost." Cole reached out and touched his father's name, traced the letters with fingers that shook slightly. Then he held James up so the baby could see. "This is your grandfather," he said softly. "James Maddox. He died fighting for what was right. Your mother and I finished what he started." He looked at Evelyn, his eyes bright. "And you and your sister are going to grow up in a world where that matters." The speech someone asked Cole to give was short. He'd never been a man of many words, but what he said carried the weight of truth. 15 years ago, my father died because one man valued profit over people. For 15 years, I hid from that. Told myself there was nothing I could do, that men like Victor Caldwell always won. He paused, looked out at the crowd of workers and families. But my wife taught me something. She taught me that hiding is just another way of letting them win. That standing up matters. That fighting for what's right matters. Even when you don't think you can win. He held up James, this baby who bore his grandfather's name. This is what winning looks like. Not revenge, not destruction, but building something better. Creating a world where our children don't have to choose between safety and survival. Where good work gets fair pay. Where people matter more than silver. The crowd erupted in applause. But Cole wasn't finished. I can't take credit for this. The credit belongs to you. To every worker who voted to share profits instead of hoarding them. To every family that chose to stay and fight when running would have been easier. To my wife, who refused to let anyone tell her she was broken. To Emma Reeves, whose death reminded us what we were fighting for. To Dr. Fletcher and Michael Chen and Tom Reeves and everyone else who risked everything for justice. He looked at Evelyn, standing at the edge of the crowd with hope on her hip. But most of all, it belongs to the belief that we're not powerless. That ordinary people can stand against empires and win, not because we're special, but because we refuse to give up. That night, they stayed in their old cabin, the one Evelyn had lived in during her years alone. Someone had maintained it, kept it clean and ready. It felt smaller than she remembered, the rooms that had once echoed with loneliness now filled with the sounds of family. She put the children to bed in the room that had been hers, James in a borrowed cradle and Hope on a pallet on the floor. Cole joined her after checking the doors, old habits of security reasserting themselves even in the valley they'd helped transform. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked, pulling her against his chest. "Saying yes to a stranger who showed up at midnight with a business proposition?" Evelyn thought about the woman she'd been 8 months ago. Empty arms and buried grief and a life measured in other people's joy. Thought about the leap of faith it had taken to follow Cole up a mountain into an uncertain future. "Not once," she said. "You offered me partnership, honesty, a chance to stop being alone. You gave me everything you promised and more. I promised you winters survived together. I didn't promise you a war against the most powerful man in the territory. No, but you promised me honesty. And the honest truth is that man needed to be stopped, that these people needed someone to fight for them." She turned in his arms so she could see his face. "You were hiding from the world when I met you. Now look at you, giving speeches, leading a cooperative, raising children. You're not the same man who knocked on my door. Neither are you the same woman who answered it." "No," Evelyn agreed. "I'm better. We both are. That's what happens when you stop running from the hard things, when you choose to stand and fight instead of hiding in safety." They fell asleep in her old bed, their children breathing softly nearby, the valley quiet around them. And for the first time since Thomas had died 7 years ago, Evelyn spent a night in that cabin without ghosts. The morning brought a surprise. Dr. Fletcher appeared at their door, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I need advice," he said without preamble. "I want to expand the clinic, bring in more physicians, train local women as nurses, create a real hospital that can serve the whole territory. But I don't know if the cooperative can afford it." Cole and Evelyn exchanged glances. They'd been talking about what to do with their share of the cooperative's profits. They'd been considering options, possibilities. "What if," Evelyn said slowly, "we funded it? Not all of it, but enough to get started. We could endow a medical school, create a training program for frontier medicine, make sure every valley and mountain community has access to real health care." Fletcher's eyes widened. That would change everything. "But the cost, we have the money." Cole's voice was quiet but firm. "Caldwell's seized assets, our share of the cooperative. The ranch is profitable. And what's money for if not making the world better?" They spent the morning planning. A hospital in Pine Ridge, a medical school that would train physicians and nurses for frontier communities, scholarships for young people who wanted to heal but couldn't afford the education, a network of clinics spreading across the territory, all following Fletcher's model of care regardless of ability to pay. It was ambitious. It was expensive. It was exactly the kind of thing Evelyn had dreamed about during those lonely years delivering babies for $3 a birth. "Emma would have loved this," she said, thinking of the woman who'd died because proper medical care had been too far away. She'd love knowing her daughter will grow up in a world where no woman has to die in childbirth because help wasn't available. Then we'll build it in her name, Fletcher said, the Emma Reeves Memorial Hospital and Medical School. A place that exists because one woman's death made us realize the cost of doing nothing. They returned to Ironcrest Mountain a week later, their hearts full and their purpose clear. The ranch would always be home, but their work was bigger than one mountain, one valley. They'd started a revolution, not with guns or violence, but with the simple radical idea that people mattered more than profit. The summer passed in planning and building. The hospital took shape in Pine Ridge Valley, a two-story structure that would serve hundreds. The medical school accepted its first class of students, 6 young people from across the territory who wanted to heal. The cooperative continued to thrive, proving that workers could govern themselves, that fairness could be profitable. And on Ironcrest Mountain, 2 children grew strong under the watchful eyes of parents who'd fought for their future. Hope became the valley's favorite child, spending half her time on the mountain and half in Pine Ridge, adopted by everyone who'd known her mother. James grew fat and happy, a serious baby who studied everything with dark eyes that missed nothing. One evening in late August, as the sun was setting over the peaks and the children were asleep, Cole found Evelyn on the porch, staring at the valley below. "What are you thinking?" he asked, settling beside her. "That a year ago I was a widow living alone in an empty cabin, that I'd convinced myself I was broken, that I'd accepted that my life would be small and useful and lonely." She leaned against him. "And now I'm a mother of 2, a wife, a revolutionary, apparently. It's almost too much to believe." "Believe it." He kissed her temple. "You earned every piece of this." "We earned it, together." She turned to face him. "I love you, Cole Maddox. I love the life we've built. I love our children, and our mountain, and our ridiculous crusade to remake the territory one valley at a time." "It is pretty ridiculous when you put it that way. Best kind of ridiculous." She kissed him slowly, thoroughly, the kind that matters. Inside, James started crying, that specific cry that meant he was hungry. Evelyn stood to go to him, but Cole caught her hand. "Before you go, there's something I want to say." She waited, this man who'd learned to speak his heart. "When I came to your door that night, I was looking for a partner, someone to help me survive the winters. I thought that was all I needed, all I deserved." His voice roughened. "You gave me that. But you also gave me courage, purpose, a reason to stop hiding and start fighting. You made me remember what it means to be part of something bigger than fear." "Cole, I'm not done." He smiled. "You had empty arms and called yourself broken, but you were never broken. You were just waiting for the right life to fill those arms. And I was waiting for someone brave enough to see past my walls. We found each other. And we built something that neither of us could have built alone." James's cries increased in volume. Hope called out sleepily from her room. The sounds of family, demanding and beautiful, and exactly what they'd both stopped believing they could have. "Come on," Evelyn said, pulling Cole to his feet. "Our children are calling. Our life is waiting." They went inside together, to the noise and the chaos, and the perfect mess of the family they'd chosen. Behind them, the sun set over Ironcrest Mountain, painting the sky in shades of promise. The woman with empty arms had found her life, and her arms would never be empty again. The seasons turned on Ironcrest Mountain, each one bringing its own rhythms and revelations. James grew from a serious infant into a serious toddler who followed his father everywhere, mimicking the way Cole walked, the way he held tools, the quiet intensity with which he approached the world. Hope became the valley's wild child, fearless and bright, splitting her time between the mountain ranch and Pine Ridge, with the easy confidence of someone who'd never known she wasn't wanted everywhere. But it was October when everything changed again. Evelyn was in the kitchen preparing vegetables for dinner when she felt it, a cramping low in her abdomen that made her freeze mid-cut. She set down the knife carefully, pressed a hand to her stomach, and tried to breathe through the sudden spike of fear. "Not again. Please, not again." The cramping passed after a moment. Evelyn told herself it was nothing, just the normal aches of a body that had carried 2 children in less than 2 years. But she knew her own body too well to believe the lie. She was pregnant again, and something was wrong. She said nothing to Cole that night, watching him play with the children before bed, his face soft with the uncomplicated joy of fatherhood. She didn't want to worry him, didn't want to admit that the miracle of James might have been a one-time gift rather than a permanent change in her body's capabilities. But the cramping came again the next day, and the next. By the fourth day, there was spotting. Dr. Fletcher rode up from the valley at Evelyn's request, examined her with the careful thoroughness of someone who understood what she'd survived to get here. His face when he finished was grave. "You're about 8 weeks along, but there are complications. The pregnancy isn't developing normally. I can't tell you with certainty what will happen, but—" He stopped, met her eyes. "I'd prepare for the possibility of loss." Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed, hands folded in her lap, and felt the old grief trying to resurface. 7 years she'd carried the weight of her first son's death. 7 years of believing her body was broken. James's birth had been a miracle, proof that she could do this after all. But maybe miracles were meant to be singular. "How long?" she asked quietly. "Could be days, could be weeks. There's nothing to be done but wait and see." Fletcher touched her shoulder gently. "I'm sorry, Evelyn. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear." She told Cole that night after the children were asleep, her voice steady despite the breaking happening inside her chest. He pulled her into his arms and held her while she finally let herself cry, great wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her body. "It's not fair," she whispered against his chest. "We fought so hard, changed everything. Why can't we have this too?" "I don't know." His own voice was rough with grief. "But whatever happens, we face it together. You're not alone this time." The pregnancy lasted another 2 weeks before her body finally gave up trying to hold on to what it couldn't sustain. The miscarriage came at night, painful and inevitable, taking with it the hope of another child. Dr. Fletcher confirmed what Evelyn already knew. The damage from her first son's birth had healed enough to allow her to carry James, but another pregnancy would likely end the same way. Her body could create life, but struggled to sustain it beyond a certain point. "I'm sorry," Fletcher said again, the words inadequate against the magnitude of loss. Evelyn thanked him for coming, sent him back to the valley, and then let herself feel the full weight of finality. 2 living children was more than she'd ever dreamed possible. But it was also less than she'd started to hope for, and the grief of that gap felt like drowning. Cole stayed close in the days that followed, taking over the children's care while Evelyn healed physically and tried to patch herself back together emotionally. Hope was too young to understand why Mama stayed in bed, but James seemed to sense something wrong. He'd climb up beside her and pat her hand with his small fingers, his dark eyes solemn. "Mama sad?" he'd ask in his limited toddler vocabulary. "A little," she'd admit, "but Mama still loves you very much." It was Tom Reeves who brought the solution, though he didn't know it at the time. He rode up to the ranch 3 weeks after Evelyn's miscarriage, looking haggard in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. Hope ran to greet him, demanding to be picked up and swung around the way he always did. But his smile was strained. Cole invited him inside, poured coffee, waited with the patience of someone who understood that some stories took time to tell. "There's a boy," Tom finally said, "in Pine Ridge. Name's Tommy Chen. He's Michael's nephew, 10 years old. His parents were killed in a mine accident down in Silver City 6 months ago. Michael took him in, but—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Michael's sick. Consumption. Dr. Fletcher says he's got maybe a year, probably less, and Tommy doesn't have anyone else." Evelyn felt something shift in her chest. "What happens to him when Michael dies?" "Orphanage, probably. Or he'll end up working the mines at 12, same as half the boys who don't have family to protect them." Tom looked at them with desperate eyes. "I know it's not my place to ask. I know you've got your own children and your own grief. But I thought maybe—" "We'll take him," Evelyn said. Cole's head snapped toward her. "Evelyn, we'll take him," she repeated, more firmly. "Michael Chen risked everything to help us bring down Caldwell. His nephew isn't going to an orphanage or the mines. Not while we have space in our home and our hearts." "It's not the same as having your own," Tom warned gently. "Adoption. It's different than... I know what adoption is, Evelyn interrupted, thinking of Hope asleep in the room they'd made for her. And it's not different where it matters. Love is love. Family is family. That boy needs parents. We can be those parents. Cole studied her face for a long moment, reading all the things she wasn't saying, that her body might not be able to give them more biological children, but there were other ways to build a family. That loss didn't have to be the end of growth. That sometimes the children who needed you most weren't the ones you gave birth to. All right, he said quietly. We'll talk to Michael, see what he wants for his nephew. Michael Chen was dying in a back room of the boarding house where he'd lived his entire adult life, his body wasted by a disease that turned lungs into useless tissue. But his mind was sharp, and when they explained their offer, his eyes filled with tears of relief. I've been terrified, he admitted, his voice a rasp. Terrified of dying and leaving Tommy alone. He's a good boy, smart, but he's angry about his parents, and I don't know how to help him with that. Don't have enough time left to teach him everything he needs to know. Then let us, Evelyn said. Let us give him a home, a family, a chance to be a child instead of another worker ground down by the system. Michael looked at her for a long time, this woman who'd helped destroy the empire that had killed his father. You'll tell him about me? About what we did? About why it mattered? Every day, Cole promised. We'll make sure he knows his uncle fought for justice, that he was brave when it counted. Tommy Chen came to live with them a week later, a skinny boy with his uncle's careful eyes and a heart full of fury at a world that had taken everything from him. He didn't speak much those first days, just watched everything with the wariness of someone waiting for the next blow to fall. Hope tried to befriend him immediately, chattering at him in her mix of words and gestures, offering him her favorite toys. Tommy accepted them with confusion, like he'd forgotten that kindness existed. James simply climbed into Tommy's lap one afternoon and fell asleep there, the ultimate toddler declaration of trust. Tommy sat frozen, not sure what to do with an armful of sleeping child, until Evelyn took pity on him. You can put him down if you want, or you can just let him sleep. He likes you. Why? Tommy's voice was rough, suspicious. He doesn't even know me. Because you're part of this family now, and family takes care of family. I'm not family. I'm just some kid you're stuck with. Evelyn sat down beside him, careful not to disturb James. You're Michael Chen's nephew. Michael was one of the bravest men I've ever known. He spent 15 years documenting Victor Caldwell's crimes, risking his life every single day because he believed in justice. That makes you family in the ways that matter. My uncle's dying. The words came out flat, empty. I know, and I'm sorry. It's not fair and it's not right, and you have every reason to be angry about it. Are you going to try to make me not be angry? His eyes challenged her. Tell me everything happens for a reason or some other adult lie? No? Evelyn's voice was steady. I'm going to tell you that anger is useful, that it can drive you to fight for change, to make sure other kids don't lose their parents to preventable accidents. But I'm also going to tell you that anger without direction just eats you alive. Trust me, I spent 7 years learning that lesson. Tommy looked at her properly for the first time. What happened to you? I lost my husband and my first baby within 3 days of each other. Spent years believing I was broken because I couldn't save them. She gestured around the ranch at the life she'd built. But broken things can be rebuilt, and sometimes they're stronger in the places they cracked. He thought about that while James snored softly in his lap. My uncle said you changed everything, that you and Mr. Maddox took down the most powerful man in the territory. We did, with your uncle's help. He was the one who made it possible. Good. Tommy's jaw set with determination that looked eerily like Michael's. When I grow up, I want to do that too. Change things. Make sure people like Caldwell can't hurt people anymore. Evelyn smiled. Then you're definitely in the right family. Tommy settled into ranch life with the adaptability of children who'd learned early that survival meant flexibility. He helped Cole with the cattle, learned to ride, took on chores with a seriousness that sometimes broke Evelyn's heart. But slowly, gradually, she saw him start to relax, saw him laugh at Hope's antics, saw him teach James how to stack blocks, patient in the way of older siblings everywhere. saw him start to believe that maybe this was permanent, that maybe he'd found a place where he could stay. Michael Chen died in December, peacefully in his sleep with Tommy at his bedside. The valley turned out for his funeral, every person whose life had been changed by the documents he'd preserved, the courage he'd shown. They buried him next to the memorial that bore his father's name, 2 generations of Chen men who'd fought for justice in different ways. Tommy stood at the grave with dry eyes, his small hand tight in Cole's larger one. He didn't cry until later that night, when Evelyn tucked him into bed and he finally broke, sobbing with the force of an orphan who'd now lost everyone. "I've got nobody," he wept. "Everyone's gone." "You've got us," Evelyn said firmly, holding him while he cried. "You've got me and Cole and Hope and James. You've got a whole valley of people who loved your uncle and will look out for you because of him. You're not alone, Tommy. You're never going to be alone again." He cried himself to sleep in her arms, and Evelyn sat there in the darkness. This boy who wasn't hers by blood, but was absolutely hers by choice. She thought about the baby she'd lost, the grief she'd carried. Thought about how loss and love were so often intertwined that it was impossible to have one without risking the other. But the risk, she was learning, was always worth it. Spring brought change, as it always did. The Emma Reeves Memorial Hospital and Medical School opened its doors, a gleaming symbol of what community investment could accomplish. Dr. Fletcher gave the opening speech, but it was Evelyn who cut the ribbon, with Hope and James and Tommy standing beside her. "This hospital exists because one woman died when she shouldn't have," Evelyn said to the assembled crowd. "Because a community decided that access to healthcare is a right, not a privilege. Because we chose to build something better than what we inherited." The first class of medical students began their training the next week. 6 young people from across the territory, including 2 women and a former miner who'd lost his leg in an accident and decided he wanted to heal instead of dig. They learned from Dr. Fletcher, from Evelyn, from visiting physicians who believed in frontier medicine. The cooperative continued to thrive, expanding into timber and farming, creating a diversified economy that didn't depend on silver. Other valleys started reaching out, asking how Pine Ridge had transformed itself, wanting to replicate the model. Cole spent more time traveling, helping other communities organize, sharing the lessons they'd learned. And on Ironcrest Mountain, a family grew. Tommy became the child who asked endless questions, who wanted to understand how everything worked. He followed Cole everywhere, learning ranching and carpentry and the 1,000 small skills required to survive in the mountains. But he also studied with Evelyn, learning basic medicine, reading every book they could find about law and justice and how societies changed. "I'm going to be a lawyer," he announced one evening at dinner. He was 12 now, gangly and serious, his uncle's determination written in every line of his body. "I'm going to make sure men like Caldwell never get away with murder again." "Then we'll make sure you get the education you need," Cole said. "When you're ready, we'll send you to the best law school we can find." Hope, at 4, had decided she was going to be a rancher like her papa, or maybe a doctor like Mama, or possibly a horse. Her ambitions changed daily, but her confidence never wavered. She was fearless in the way of children raised in love, certain that the world would catch her when she fell. James, quieter but equally determined, shadowed his older brother and absorbed everything. At 2.5, he could already read simple words, could count to 50, could identify every plant in Evelyn's medicinal garden. He had his father's intensity and his mother's careful observation, a combination that promised interesting things for his future. The family took trips to Pine Ridge regularly, maintaining their connection to the valley they'd helped transform. They watched the community flourish, watched children grow up with opportunities their parents had never had, watched the cooperative model spread to neighboring territories. But they always returned to Ironcrest Mountain. It was home in a way that nowhere else could be, the place where 2 broken people had chosen to rebuild together, where empty arms had been filled, where love had proven stronger than grief. One summer evening when Tommy was 13, Hope 6, and James 4, the family sat on the porch watching the sun set over the valley. It was the kind of perfect moment that happened rarely enough to be precious. Everyone healthy, everyone together, no crises demanding attention. "Tell us the story again," Hope demanded, "about how you and Papa met." Evelyn laughed. "You've heard it 100 times. But I like it. Tell it again." So Evelyn told the story she'd told many times before, but never tired of telling. About the midnight knock on her door. About the mountain man who'd offered partnership instead of romance. About the choice to take a risk on an uncertain future. And then you fought a bad man and won, Hope summarized with satisfaction. We fought an unjust system and changed it, Cole corrected gently. There's a difference. The bad man was just a symptom of a bigger problem. But you still won, Tommy said. You and Mama and Uncle Michael and all the others, you proved that ordinary people could stand up to power. We proved that standing up matters, Evelyn said, that silence is complicity, that if you see something wrong and you have the power to change it, you have the responsibility to try. James, ever practical, had a different question. Mama, do you miss the baby, the one who didn't get born? The question hung in the evening air. Evelyn felt Cole's hand find hers, his silent support. Yes, she said honestly, I'll always carry a little grief for the children I couldn't bring into the world. But that grief doesn't diminish the joy I have in you three. You're not consolation prizes. You're the family I was meant to have, even if the path to get here was harder than I wanted it to be. I'm glad you picked me, Tommy said quietly, even though I wasn't nice at first, even though I was angry all the time. I didn't pick you despite the anger, Evelyn told him. I picked you because I understood it, because I saw a boy who'd lost everything and was still fighting. That's the kind of strength this family needs. Hope, getting bored with the serious conversation, announced she was going to catch fireflies. James immediately followed his sister, and Tommy went after them both with the long-suffering patience of the eldest child. Their laughter echoed across the mountain, bright and uncomplicated. Cole and Evelyn sat in the gathering dusk, watching their children play. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd said no? Cole asked. If you'd turned me away that night? Evelyn considered it. I think I would have stayed in Pine Ridge, delivering babies and going home alone, until I was too old to do either. I think I would have been useful and respected and utterly empty. I would have stayed up here until the loneliness killed me, Cole said, or until I got so bitter that I couldn't remember why any of it mattered. We saved each other then. We built something together that neither of us could have built alone. He pulled her closer. A family, a community, a legacy. That's better than saving. That's choosing to live instead of just survive. The years continued their steady march. Tommy left for law school in San Francisco when he was 18, promising to return and use his education to help the territory. Hope grew into a force of nature, equally comfortable delivering a calf and negotiating with mountain trappers for fair prices. James became the family's quiet center, the one who mediated disputes and found solutions that made everyone happy. The cooperative expanded to cover half the territory, a network of communities that had learned to govern themselves fairly. The medical school graduated class after class of frontier physicians who spread across the West, bringing quality health care to places that had never had it. The Emma Reeves Memorial Hospital became a teaching hospital, training nurses and specialists, saving lives that would have been lost a generation earlier. And Victor Caldwell died in prison, unmourned and largely forgotten, a cautionary tale about the limits of power built on exploitation. Evelyn was 45 when she delivered her last baby, not her own, but Sarah Winters' fourth child, a daughter born healthy and strong in the bedroom of a house that Sarah now owned outright. As Evelyn cleaned up afterward, watching Sarah nurse her baby while her husband looked on with uncomplicated joy, she felt the full weight of her life's work. Hundreds of babies delivered. Dozens of women taught the skills to help themselves and their communities. A medical school training the next generation. A valley transformed from exploitation to cooperation. Children raised to believe in justice and change and their own power to affect both. You're thinking too hard, Sarah said, smiling. I can see it on your face. Just taking stock. Evelyn touched the baby's head gently. Remembering where we started. Grateful for where we are. She rode home to Ironcrest Mountain as the sun set, taking the familiar trail she could now navigate blind. The ranch had grown over the years, more cattle, more land, a second house where Hope lived with her new husband, another building where James ran his own medical practice serving the mountain communities. Tommy was back from San Francisco now, working as the territorial attorney, using his legal skills to protect workers' rights, and prosecute the kind of exploitation that had killed his grandfather and uncle. He visited the ranch regularly, bringing his young wife and their infant son, Michael, named for the uncle who'd saved him. 3 children, not born from her body but chosen by her heart. 3 adults now, building their own lives while remaining tethered to the family that had formed them. Grandchildren beginning to arrive, carrying the legacy forward. Cole was waiting on the porch when she arrived, gray in his hair now, but still strong, still steady. Still the man who'd offered her partnership when the world offered only pity. "How was the winter's delivery?" he asked, helping her down from her horse. "Perfect. Easy. Sarah's getting good at this." Evelyn leaned against him, tired in the way of women who'd spent decades putting others first. "I think it might be time to step back. Let the younger doctors handle most of it. You've earned the rest." "Have I?" She looked out at the valley spread below them, the lights of Pine Ridge beginning to twinkle in the gathering dark. "Sometimes I feel like there's always more to do, more people to help, more systems to change." "There will always be more," Cole agreed. "But you don't have to carry it all yourself anymore. You built something that outlasts you, trained people who'll carry it forward. That's the definition of legacy." They went inside to the house that had sheltered their family for so many years, to the kitchen table where they'd made 1,000 decisions, to the bedroom where they'd learned that love was a choice renewed daily rather than a single moment of passion. That night, lying in the darkness with Cole's heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Evelyn thought about the woman she'd been 17 years ago, the widow with empty arms who'd believed she was broken, the midwife who went home alone to a silent cabin and called it a life. She thought about the midnight knock that had changed everything, the choice to say yes to uncertainty, the decision to fight instead of hide. "Cole?" she whispered. "Thank you. For seeing my scars and calling them strength. For offering me a life when I'd stopped believing I deserved one. For being my partner in every way that matters." His arms tightened around her. "Thank you for teaching me that hiding from pain doesn't make it hurt less. For showing me that standing up matters even when you're scared. For choosing me when you could have chosen safety. I'd choose you again. Every time. In every version of this life." "Same," he said simply, and in that single word was 17 years of partnership, of love built on honesty and choice and the daily decision to keep building. The mountains settled into sleep around them. In the house Hope had built nearby, her children dreamed. In Pine Ridge Valley, hundreds of people lived lives that had been impossible before 2 broken people decided to fight for something better. In San Francisco, Tommy prepared legal arguments that would protect workers across the territory. Across the frontier, doctors trained in the Emma Reeves Memorial Medical School saved lives in communities that had never had access to care. And on Ironcrest Mountain, in a bed built by a man who'd once hidden from the world, a woman who'd once believed she was broken slept with arms that would never be empty again. The woman who'd delivered half the babies in Pine Ridge Valley had done more than bring life into the world. She'd changed the world those lives would inherit. She'd proven that ordinary people could stand against empires, that love built on choice was stronger than love built on circumstance, that empty arms were an opportunity, not a sentence. She'd survived the worst things, built a life from the ruins of loss, chosen to fill the emptiness with purpose and family and the kind of love that transformed everything it touched. Her story wasn't a fairy tale. It was something better. It was true in all the ways that mattered. A testament to the power of standing up, of choosing each other, of believing that broken things could be rebuilt into something stronger. And as dawn broke over the mountain, painting the sky in shades of promise, Evelyn Hart Maddox woke beside her husband in the life they'd built together, surrounded by the family they'd chosen, in a world they'd fought to change. Her arms were full, her heart was whole, and the empty silence that had defined so many years had been replaced by something infinitely more precious, the sounds of love and life and legacy carrying forward into a future she'd helped create. This was what victory looked like, not in headlines or monuments, but in children who grew up believing they could change the world, in communities that governed themselves with justice and fairness, in a woman who'd once thought she had nothing left to give, discovering that her greatest gifts were still ahead of her. The mountains stood eternal around them, witness to all they'd survived and built. And in the kitchen where they'd made their partnership real, where they'd planned revolutions and raised children and learned that love was both simpler and more complicated than anyone had told them, coffee began to brew as another day began. Evelyn Hart Maddox rose to meet it with arms that had learned to hold everything that mattered: hope and grief, love and legacy, the children she'd birthed and the children she'd chosen, the past she'd survived and the future she'd helped build. Empty no more. Broken no longer. Just full, finally and completely full, in all the ways that counted.